Good afternoon and welcome back to the Public Service Commission in the hearing regarding docket 2021-2-E related to the annual review of fuel costs for Dominion Energy South Carolina. Let's take a roll call of commissioners, please. Okay, see if I can see that far. Here in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Caston, Vice Chair Belser. Virtually, we have Commissioner Thomas and Commissioner Powers, Commissioner Irvin, and Commissioner Carolee Williams. Dominion, we are still on your witnesses. Who's up?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I call Margot Everett to the virtual witness stand.
And this is Mr. Green?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
Just identifying you for the court reporter.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Excuse me. In the testimony you're about to give, do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Please state your full name for the record.
Margot Everett.
And by who are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Guidehouse, formerly known as Navigant, and I'm a director in their energy practice.
And have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your direct supervision and pre-filed in this docket 27 pages of rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I have.
And do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed testimonies?
No, I do not.
If I asked you all the questions contained in your rebuttal testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Vice Chair, we would remove into the record the pre-filed testimony of Ms. Everett as given orally from the stand.
The pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Ms. Everett will be entered into the record as if given orally. Thank you.
Ms. Everett, did you attach any exhibits to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
No, I did not.
And let me just be clear, Ms. Everett, did you file any direct testimony in this proceeding?
No, I did not.
Okay. Ms. Everett, have you prepared a summary of your rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I have.
Please deliver that now.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Belser and members of the Commission. In my rebuttal testimony filed on behalf of DESC, I respond to certain recommendations in the testimony of R. Thomas Beach that was filed in this matter, including the testimony included as exhibit number RTB-2 that was filed in the generic docket, which is docket number 2019-182-E. I disagree with witness Beach's estimates of the value of solar he calculated in exhibit number RTB-2. Witness Beach uses several extremely aggressive assumptions regarding the values of all components of avoided costs in the NEM methodology that are neither fully substantiated by data nor vetted in any regulatory setting in South Carolina or elsewhere. It is also important to note that Witness Beach ignores key elements of the stipulation from docket number 2014-246-E that established the methodology or the NEM methodology that resulted in evaluation of each benefit and cost component for the NEM or the NEM methodology values. The NEM methodology values are currently used for determining the incremental NEM incentive assigned to the company's distribution energy resource program incremental costs for recovery purposes. The NEM methodology was the result of a settlement, or the NEM settlement, among numerous parties. At the outset, I note that Witness Beach falsely states that DESC arbitrarily sets values for the NEM methodology to zero. These values are not set to zero, but rather calculated as zero. Throughout Witness Beach's testimony, he provides an estimate of the avoided cost value of the component using his own methodologies, assumptions, and data that are either inconsistent with already approved commission values or are incorrect. Other methodologies he uses, such as calculating fuel savings and carbon value, are simply not correct. He also deviates from the commission-approved estimates of the contribution of customer generation energy and capacity to avoiding these established costs. Witness Beach provides a number of estimates that are overstated and incorrect or unclear as follows. The estimate of avoided energy costs is based on out-of-date values that he then inflated over 25 years using an excessive annual growth rate, and it also is unclear in how criterion pollutants are used in the calculation. The estimate of generation capacity cost is incorrect because it ignores the generation capacity values the Commission recently has approved for inclusion in the compensation rate for solar generation. The estimate of transmission capacity costs is overstated and inaccurate because he improperly uses transmission costs between 2009 and 2019, not just those related to load growth, resulting in a significantly higher estimate of avoided transmission marginal costs than appropriate. He also provides a solar capacity contribution value of 42.5% with no evidence of whether transmission costs actually are avoided. Finally, Witness Beach inflates his estimate by 118% to account for the levelized value over 25 years versus the appropriate 10 years. I note that for energy efficiency programs, DESC calculated transmission capacity avoided costs at a value that is 89% lower than that provided by Witness Beach. The estimate of distribution capacity costs is overstated and inaccurate because he used costs that were not related to peak demand growth, and he also uses a solar capacity generation contribution value of 35.6% with no evidence that the value is appropriate. The value calculated by DSC for purposes of energy efficiency program is 80% lower than that calculated by Witness Beach. And finally, the use of a 25-year life overstates the value by about 10%. The estimate of environmental costs is inaccurate for several reasons. The NEM methodology stipulation sets CO2 emissions costs at zero until federal or state regulations include these costs. The GHG costs that Witness Beach references are dated because the IRP has been updated with more current values, with the result that Witness Beach dramatically overstates the value of GHG. The estimation of hedging costs is inaccurate and misleading because DESC does not hedge gas purchases and because some long-term hedge value is already baked into the avoided costs, and thus what he proposes results in double counting. His concept of gas hedging is incorrect and would not produce the level of cash outlay he contemplates. And finally, his approach would not actually hedge against price volatility. It is unclear whether Witness Beach includes values for integration and interconnection costs in calculating avoided costs based on the explanation that he provides. Witness Beach calculates loss factors using an alternative methodology, not part of the NEM methodology, and offers no detail as to the calculation. His losses for capacity and energy far exceed the historically applied 7.55% of total costs, and he appears to apply different loss factors for capacity versus energy. Because the methodology is unclear, it should be disregarded in favor of the current methodology. I further disagree with Witness Beach's statement that residential solar passes all cost effectiveness tests. The reason that residential solar passes the cost effectiveness tests he applies is because he uses inflated values for these categories. As shown in Table 3 of my testimony, using the correct values for NEM distribution energy resources shows that it does not pass the cost effectiveness tests. Witness Beach's conclusions is based on the misleading analysis that greatly overstates the avoided costs using values not approved by this commission. Finally, I disagree that the commission should consider societal costs in assuming the effectiveness of NEM distribution energy resources. Although few jurisdictions certainly consider externality benefits in assessing the cost effectiveness of a program, they do not use these items in setting rates. Moreover, externality costs are very difficult to quantify and highly dependent upon numerous and contentious assumptions. Significantly, these costs are not avoided by the utility, and thus the inclusion of these externality costs will result in increasing the cost to the utility. Finally, customers will be required to pay for the additional compensation resulting from the inclusion of externality costs. In summary, I propose the Commission accept the solar values as calculated in Witness Bell's corrected direct testimony. The unreasonableness of Witness Beach's proposal is reflected in the fact that he proposes an arbitrarily bloated value for DER is higher than the retail rate, which he admits on page 9 of line 2 of his direct testimony. I therefore specifically recommend that the Commission reject witness Beach's proposal for NEM distribution energy resources values and adopt those that were proposed by the company and that are consistent with the methodology set forth in and required by previous orders issued by this Commission.
Thank you, Ms. Everett. Madam Vice Chair, Ms. Everett is available for cross-examination by the other parties of record as well as examination by the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. South Carolina Energy Users Committee.
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
SACE and CCL.
Yes, Madam Chair, we have a few questions.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Ms. Everett.
Good afternoon.
I guess in your case, morning, I believe.
Still.
Okay. I'm Kurt Ebersbach. I represent SACE and the Coastal Conservation League. I just have a few questions about your testimony. At first, I'm going to ask you about page 12 of your testimony, if you want to go to that.
Yes, I'm on page 12.
Okay, great. Thank you. So on the subject of transmission capacity, you fault Mr. Beach for using all transmission costs in his analysis, including those not related to load growth. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And you say that most utilities study transmission data and identify projects for load growth, which then allows them to identify which projects are avoidable if load turns out to be less than anticipated. Is that correct?
Correct.
So has Dominion done that sort of analysis, separating out those types of transmission projects?
My understanding that as part of the demand side management docket, Dominion does provide a transmission avoided cost that is based off of the expectations of those transmission projects that are related to load growth. I'm not familiar enough with their study to be able to say that their approach was to look at projects that could be avoided versus projects that are designated for load growth.
So you yourself haven't reviewed that data, is that right?
Not in detail.
And yet you say that this error, as you put it by Mr. Beach, resulted in a significantly higher estimate of avoided costs. So how can you say that if you haven't actually looked at the data?
Well, I looked at the results of a study performed by Dominion, and I did look at the methodology description, and the methodology description does say that they are using transmission costs that are related to load growth. What I was merely distinguishing was whether or not it's a project that's specifically avoidable versus just a project that has been designated for load growth.
Now, I'm sorry, you finished?
Yes.
Okay. Does customer solar adoption result in load reduction by those customers?
It results in energy reduction, whether or not it results in transmission capacity reductions is still an area of debate, and in particular for Dominion, South Carolina, there's been enough analysis done with respect to the needs of their system to say that capacity needs are not impacted by solar. Specifically, as Witness Bell said, there's Dominion has a winter peaking system at this time, and also it's important to remember that these resources that are being provided through the solar are intermittent, and therefore the utility has to be prepared to not only serve when there's high loads, but also when that generation is not available.
All right, so you, and I have some questions about that, what you just said, but further down on this same page, page 12 of your testimony, you say that historical NEM data from Dominion shows that 48% of on-site generation offsets customer use?
Energy use, yes.
Okay. But so you're not prepared to say that that also means that customer generators cut load on the transmission and distribution system by roughly half?
No. Because that's on average. That 48% is the cumulative number of kilowatt hours that the customer is able to self-consume behind the meter, not the reduction in their demand.
Okay. Now, were you present before when Mr. Bell testified?
Yes.
So did you hear him acknowledge that the system does experience stress during summer peak hours?
Yes.
And given that, is it really your testimony that to the extent customer generators reduce their load during those same hours by self-supplying, that does nothing to reduce wear and tear on the system, thereby avoiding or deferring costly upgrades?
In following up with what Witness Bell said, is that in studying the transmission system, the system is needed to provide peak capacity during the winter peak period. As far as reduction on wear and tear, as I noted before, just because there's the transmission system may be being used slightly less on a kilowatt hour basis, it still continues to be used significantly by these customers when they pull electricity for their own use when the generator is not generating, be it in the early mornings of the winter period, or when the rooftop solar system just isn't producing or has an intermittent interruption of production as the solar production can be influenced by weather.
Okay, well, the focus of my question was specifically during the summer peak hours. So are you saying that if a customer generator is self-supplying during those hours, that they are making use of the transmission and distribution system?
Yes, because they continue to not rely 100. They continue to not rely 100% on the generation from their facility. They still rely on capacity from the transmission system when the solar system is not producing.
Well, my question was specifically when it is producing and they are consuming their own generation. They're not making use of the T&D system then, are they?
Not for that moment, no.
Now, when you say historical NEM data, which years did you review?
That was 2019.
So just 1 year of data?
Yes.
And what data have you reviewed, if any, regarding winter peaks on the Dominion system?
I have looked at the load profiles for the Dominion system using the actual 2019 system load data, hourly load data.
So were they winter peaking in 2019?
I believe so. They certainly had some high use hours in the early morning.
Were they winter peaking in 2020?
I did not look at 2020 data.
And what data do you have to indicate that they'll be winter peaking for the next 25 years?
This was supported previously by DESC as they have been looking at over the last 10 years. I believe 50% of the time they were winter peaking, and as we move forward, the expectation is that winter peaking will still be a dominant peak for them to manage too, particularly as they continue to have energy efficiency programs helping out in the summer.
Now, are you aware that in this case, for purposes of allocating NEM incremental costs, including the NEM incentive, for the actual period, Dominion is using a summer peak from 2019, and for the forecast period is using a summer peak from 2020?
I'm sorry, are you asking for purposes of the numbers that are in this docket?
Yes, for allocating those costs to customers, that they're using summer peaks for both the actual and forecast periods.
Okay, so their allocation technique, yes, their allocation methodology does rely on the summer peak, from what I understand.
Now, you testified in the Solar Choice tariff proceeding, is that right?
Yes, I did.
That would be docket 2020-229-E. Subject to check?
Yes, subject to check.
And in that proceeding, you testified that Dominion did not perform a cost of service analysis specific to the NEM customer class. Do you recall that?
Correct. What we did was we used the existing embedded cost of service and existing cost reflective rates to determine the cost to serve a typical NEM customer.
So that analysis was not performed, even though Act 62 directs such consideration for purposes of determining the costs and benefits of the current net metering program.
Well, I believe what I said in my testimony is that we did conduct a study of the cost to serve, um, and use that study for the evaluation of cost to serve to determine the rate design that we submitted in that testimony, or in that docket, excuse me.
Okay, well, just so the record's clear, was there a cost of service analysis specific to NEM customers as a subclass?
The way I would characterize it is that we used the existing cost of service and meaning cost per cost driver, and allocate and then use that to determine the cost to serve the NEM customer. That's how I would characterize it.
So did this study evaluate what loads actual NEM customers are placing on the system and when?
Yes. Well, an average customer, yes. For the typical NEM customer, yes.
Okay, but not the actual NEM customers.
Oh, the typical was based off of the average. I mean, the typical was based off of actual.
Of actual NEM customers or just actual customers in the
NEM customers. Hourly data on average hourly data for NEM customers.
I next want to ask you about your testimony regarding transmission and distribution losses. And in the generic proceeding, you also testified in that proceeding, correct?
Correct.
You made recommendations for 2 adjustments to the methodology to calculate the NEM incentive.
Correct.
And one of those was to exclude distribution losses for solar exports.
Correct.
And you made that recommendation because you said it was not always the case that those exports are delivered to neighbors. Is that right?
That's correct.
So on Dominion's system, how often is it not the case that exports from customer generators are consumed within the same distribution circuit?
I don't know that there's been a study to that extent. And so I don't know that I have a percentage that I could give you. I don't have a percentage I could give you.
Okay, so you did not review any data on that subject?
No.
Now, witness Hori, if I'm getting that right, made a different recommendation, which was that distribution losses be applied in part. He proposed 50%. Is that right?
Correct.
And you, in your testimony here, you call that recommendation reasonable?
Correct.
And on what basis do you consider it reasonable?
Well, I think that there may very well be instances where a customer is delivering to their neighbor, and without having detailed analysis, it seemed like a reasonable compromise to not use the full amount, but also not set it to 0.
So it wasn't reasonable to exclude distribution losses in their entirety as you originally proposed?
I wouldn't say that. I was just saying that Ori's recommendation was reasonable.
So it sounds like
as a compromise.
Sorry.
As a compromise.
So it sounds like the company is willing to accept that recommendation, but you say it's still under consideration by the commission, correct?
That methodology change is under consideration in that generic docket, correct?
And that would be true of other adjustments to the methodology that were suggested by other parties, including us.
Adjustments to methodologies. I do want to be clear that docket was about methodological changes, not necessarily value changes. So for example, when we ran our numbers, we made some recommendations on methodological changes, but we then presented our results based off of the current methodology and the current values. I just want to distinguish the difference between a methodology and a number or a value.
Okay. And I did want, just in closing, I wanted to ask you about something you said in your testimony and your summary today about transmission distribution capacity and having that 0 value and you took issue with Mr. Beach saying that in fact, the company has calculated that value to be zero. But here's what I want to ask you. When you say they calculated that value to zero, it came out as zero because of the assumption that transmission and capacity costs cannot be avoided by solar generation, right? So in other words, there was a zero for that assumption multiplied by the value, and that's how you got to zero. Is that right?
But yes, there's an adjustment. So you first calculate the value of the avoided cost, and then you apply the contribution that the asset has to the avoided cost. I think it's the terminology used in South Carolina is like a solar capacity contribution, and that solar capacity contribution, based off of the studies that DESC has done on their transmission system and distribution systems, is zero.
Now, you're aware that the Duke utilities here in South Carolina do ascribe value to avoided transmission and distribution capacity costs.
I understand that from Mr. Beach's testimony. I do not know the magnitude of that.
Okay.
I just know that it's applied.
Can you tell me what other utilities in the Southeast ascribe zero value to avoided transmission and distribution capacity as a result of customer-sited solar?
I'm not sure that there's a lot of Southeast utilities that are examining this value stack right now in the detail that South Carolina is. I would say that there are other utilities that do include it, but it's a fairly new development. So for example, in California, it was only recently developed, and we have to remember that the level of penetration in California is quite significant compared to other states.
So sitting here today, you can't name another utility in the Southeast that provides a zero value to that component.
I'm not aware of one that assigns zero, nor am I aware of one that assigns a positive value either.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Eversbach. Office of Regulatory Staff.
ORS has no questions for this witness. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioners? Commissioners, any questions? Hearing none. Mr. Green, any redirect?
No redirect, Madam Vice Chair. I ask that the witness be released.
Ms. Everett may stand down. Ms. Everett, thank you for your testimony today. It's good to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to see all of you. Take care.
Thank you.
Dominion, your next witness, please.
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, this is Michael Anselmo. On behalf of the company, we call Mr. Alan Rooks to the virtual stand, please.
Sir, in the testimony you're about to give, do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, Mr. Rooks, could you please state your name for the record?
Alan W. Rooks.
And by whom are you employed and what capacity?
I'm currently employed by Dominion Energy Services, Inc. as Manager of Regulation for Dominion Energy, South Carolina.
Thank you. Did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 17 pages of direct testimony that was pre-filed with the commission?
Yes.
Did your direct testimony include any exhibits?
Yes. My direct testimony includes 15 exhibits.
Did you have any changes or additions to that testimony?
Yes. On February 15th, I filed corrected direct testimony to provide recalculation of certain numbers on pages 10 through 12 of my pre-filed direct testimony and in exhibits AWR 6 and AWR 7.
For that corrected direct testimony, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 17 pages of the corrected direct testimony that you then pre-filed with the commission?
Yes. Yes.
And did your corrected direct testimony include any exhibits?
Yes, my direct testimony includes 15 exhibits with the corrections made only for exhibits AWR 6 and AWR 7.
Do you have any additional changes or additions to that corrected direct testimony?
No.
If I ask you all the questions contained in your pre-filed direct testimony and your pre-filed corrected direct testimony here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Vice Chair, at this time, I move that the pre-filed direct testimony and the pre-filed corrected direct testimony of Mr. Rooks with the exhibits be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Anselmo,
Yes, ma'am.
why does the direct and then the corrected direct, why do both need to be in? I'm just curious.
You know, in actuality, they don't. We
Okay.
can move the corrected direct in because it is inclusive of the direct with the changes on pages 10 through 12.
I'm just thinking about the record. I mean, is there an objection, or is there anybody want both in? It just seems duplicative?
I tend to agree with you, Madam Chair. In fact, I was going to refer to his direct as needed, just as the corrected direct in questioning, should I have the need to do so.
Well, let me,
I don't see any reason why we need both, to be honest with you.
well, and just let me check with. Does any party object to just putting in the corrected direct and testimony and corrected exhibits? Hearing none, why don't we just do the corrected? I just I didn't see the need. Who is that?
One clarification, Madam Vice Chair. The corrected direct testimony only corrected exhibits 6 and 7 to the original testimony.
Correct. But all 15 are attached to the corrected, are they not?
Yes, ma'am, they are.
So I mean, it's all 15 exhibits. We're not leaving anything out. I want you to have a full record. I just don't like unnecessary stuff in there.
Yeah, I agree. You're right.
Okay. Well, with that, and I don't mean to tell you how you try your case. I'm just thinking, but
No, as long as we move in all exhibits with the corrected direct testimony, that works for me.
okay. Then the corrected direct testimony pre-filed by Mr. Rooks will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand. And Mr. Rooks's exhibits AWR1 through AWR15 that were attached to his corrected direct exhibit and containing the corrected exhibits will be marked as hearing exhibit number 5 and entered into the record of the case. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rooks, have you prepared a summary of your pre-filed corrected direct testimony for these proceedings?
Yes, I have.
Could you please present it to the commission at this time?
Sure. Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair Belzer and members of the commission. The purpose of my testimony is to provide the company's currently approved electric fuel factors, actual and projected data on base fuel costs, variable environmental and avoided capacity costs, and distributed energy resource avoided and incremental costs, and collection for the period January 1st, 2020 through April 30th, 2022. And the proposed base fuel, variable environmental and avoided capacity, DER avoided, DER incremental, and total fuel cost factors for retail customers for the period May 2021 through April 2022. My exhibits 1 and 2 present the detailed calculations of actual and projected base fuel costs and recovery for the period January 1, 2020 through April 30th, 2022. Exhibit 3 presents the demand allocation factors for variable environmental, avoided capacity, and DER program costs. Exhibits 4 and 5 present the detailed calculations of actual and projected variable environmental and avoided capacity costs and recovery for the period January 1st, 2020 through April 30th, 2022. Corrected Exhibits 6 and 7 present the detailed calculations of actual and projected DER avoided costs and recovery for the period January 1st, 2020 through April 30th, 2022. And corrected Exhibits 8 and 9 present the detailed calculations of actual and projected DER incremental costs and the calculation of a per account monthly component for recovery, which will not exceed the annual maximum set forth by South Carolina Code annotated section 58-39-150. Corrected Exhibit 10 presents the company's proposed base fuel component in this proceeding, and corrected Exhibit 11 presents the company's proposed total fuel cost factors for the period May 2021 through April 2022. If approved, the total fuel cost factors per kilowatt hour by retail class would be 2.523 cents per kilowatt hour for residential, 2.508 cents per kilowatt hour for small general service, 2.488 cents per kilowatt hour for medium general service, 2.464 cents per kilowatt hour for large general service, 2.413 cents per kilowatt hour for lighting. The monthly per account DER incremental charge by retail class would be $1 for residential customers, $6.15 for small and medium general service customers, and $100 for large general service customers. The impact of the company's combined spring 2021 proposals for fuel, DSM, and pension cost recovery, if approved, would be an increase of $1.80 from current rates on an average monthly bill for a residential customer using 1,000 kilowatt hours. The company requests that these factors and charges be effective for all customer classes for bills rendered on and after the first billing cycle of May 2021 and continuing through the billing month of April 2022. Corrected exhibit numbers 12 and 14 show the red line versions of the company's current rider to retail rates, second net energy metering for renewable energy facilities, and rider to retail rates, third net energy metering for renewable energy facilities, respectively, to reflect this amendment. Corrected exhibit numbers 13 and 15 are the clean versions of those tariff sheets which the company requests that the commission approve in this docket. The NEM methodology value included on these riders, as calculated in the corrected direct testimony of company witness Bell, would be 3.857 cents per kilowatt hour. Additionally, in this proceeding, DESC respectfully requests that the commission terminate its rider to residential rates and time of use demand, rate 28, net metering for renewable energy facilities, which expired on December 31st, 2020. The company also respectfully requests that the commission issue an order finding that DESC's fuel purchasing practices, plant operations, and fuel inventory management were reasonable and prudent. This concludes the summary of my corrected direct testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Rooks. And before we move to your responsive testimony, I just want to confirm that exhibits 1 through 5 as attached to your direct testimony are what will be marked and introduced into the record. Corrected 6 and 7 exhibits from your corrected direct will be marked and entered into the record. And then we will address exhibits 8 through 15 through your responsive testimony, which we're about to discuss.
That's right.
And Commissioner Vice Chair Belzer, I just wanted to make clear because exhibits 1 through 5 were only included on the DMS as part of his direct testimony. So those 1 through 5 from the direct, we'd like to move those in. All right, Mr. Rooks, did you prepare?
Mr. Anselmo.
Yes, ma'am.
Exhibits 1 through 5 will be part of composite exhibit 5, even though they were attached to the direct.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for the confusion on this. Mr. Rooks, did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 8 pages of what is titled as corrective and responsive testimony that was also pre-filed with the commission?
Yes, I have.
And did your corrective and responsive testimony include any exhibits?
Yes, it includes revised exhibits AWR 8 through 15 that were included in my direct testimony.
Thank you. And do you have any changes or additions to that testimony?
No, I do not.
And if I ask you all the questions contained in that corrective and responsive testimony here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would. Yes.
Madam Vice Chair, at this time, I move that the pre-filed corrected and responsive testimony with revised exhibits AWR 8 through AWR 15 be entered into the record as if orally given from the stand.
Mr. Rooks' corrected and responsive testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand, and his corrected or his exhibits AWR 8 through AWR 15 will be marked as a composite hearing exhibit 6 and entered into the record of this case.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And Mr. Rooks, you prepared a summary of your corrective and responsive testimony.
I have.
Could you please present that to the commission at this time?
Sure. The purpose of my corrected and responsive testimony is to provide updated exhibits in response to the forecast errors discussed in the corrected direct testimony of company witness Bell and the recommendation of ORS witness Morgan. I also respond to ORS witness Seaman Wynn's recommendations regarding treatment of the forecast error for the company's base fuel costs and the provision of quarterly expected fuel factor estimates. In witness Eric Bell's corrected direct testimony, the company corrected the net energy metering methodology values to reflect the updated NEM methodology values from 3.019 cents per kilowatt hour to 3.145 cents per kilowatt hour for the current period, and from 3.774 cents per kilowatt hour to 3.857 cents per kilowatt hour for the 10-year levelized calculation. These updated NEM methodology values impacted the forecasted Distributed Energy Resource Program, NEM incentive, and NEM future benefits. The company determined that a combined reduction of $49,992 would occur for NEM incentive and future benefits during the forecast period of January 2021 through April 2022. The updated exhibits with the correct monthly forecast values shown in red are attached to this testimony as corrected exhibit numbers AWR 8 and AWR 9. The updated DERP incremental forecast data reduces DESC's proposed small and medium general service customer class component from $6.17 per month to $6.15 per month. The proposed DERP incremental components for the residential and large general service classes are not impacted by this update. The company respectfully requests that the DERP incremental cost component set forth in my corrected and responsive testimony be approved for customers in this proceeding. Due to the change in the small general service and medium general service DERP incremental cost component, the company included corrected exhibit numbers AWR 10 and AWR 11 with this testimony for commission review and approval. The company also made corrections based on the recommendation of ORS witness O'Neill Morgan's recommendation on page 6 of his direct testimony that the company update the NEM methodology values presented in its NEM riders through corrected exhibit numbers AWR 12, 13, 14, and 15, which are attached to this testimony. ORS witness Seaman Wynn recommended on page 5 of his direct testimony that the company address any over or under recovered balance caused by its forecast error in next year's fuel proceeding. The company agrees that the approach proposed by ORS for addressing the company's forecast error is reasonable for this proceeding and does not object. The company also does not object to ORS witness Seaman Wynn's recommendation that it be required to provide quarterly estimates of the expected fuel factors to be set in the next annual fuel proceeding, provided that the estimates only be updated and provided to parties after the quarters ending June 30th and September 30th. Since the filing of this corrected and responsive testimony, DESC, the ORS, and the South Carolina Energy Users Committee have entered into a stipulation in this proceeding. The company supports all aspects of this stipulation. Exhibit C attached to the stipulation reflects the agreed upon total fuel cost factors and is the rate schedule that we asked the commission to approve in this case. The company requests that these factors be effective for all customer classes for bills rendered on and after the first billing cycle of May 2021 and continuing through the billing month of April 2022. Additionally, the company would respectfully request that the commission issue an order finding that DESC's fuel purchasing practices, plant operations, and fuel inventory management were reasonable and prudent. Based upon the stipulation as filed, the impact on an average monthly bill for a residential customer using 1,000 kilowatt hours would be an increase of $1.59. The company believes this stipulation to be a fair and reasonable resolution to the matters of this proceeding and respectfully request that the commission approve the stipulation in its entirety. This concludes the summary of my corrected and responsive testimony and the stipulation.
Madam Vice Chair, Mr. Rooks is available for questioning from the parties and the commission.
Thank you. Any questions from South Carolina Energy Users Committee?
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Any questions from SACE and CCL?
No questions, Madam Chair.
Questions from Office of Regulatory Staff?
No questions from ORS. Thank you very much.
Commissioners, any questions?
Vice Chair Belson.
Commissioner Caston?
Afternoon, Mr. Rooks.
Good afternoon, Commissioner.
This really just to clear something up for me on page 8 of your direct. I don't remember if it was the corrected direct or not, but I'm sure they're both the same. But you refer to a 4-hour band coincident peak methodology approved by the commission for over 30 years. I have an idea what that is, but I'm not sure I really understand what that is. Can you clarify that for me?
Sure, that's representative of the 2 to 6 p.m. hour on the company's peak day of each year.
Okay, thank you. How does Dominion determine peak day, peak hour, peak day and/or peak hour?
It is the period of maximum usage, maximum customer usage on the system during a given period, whether that be a calendar year, a quarter, whatever you're measuring.
I agree. What I'm asking is how do you determine that? For example, of course, now with AMI, it's much more simple, but it was typically done with meter records. So just look at our meter records and then production records. In your case, I guess generation records. In the water industry, it'd be treatment records, but primarily meter records. It just tell us, it was at least my background, it was not relevant when, we just wanted to know how much, what was the peak demand. So how does Dominion determine their peak hour and peak day demand?
That's done through metering of all of its generation and all of its sources on its system. When those requirements are the highest and those metering levels in combination are the highest, that forms the basis for the peak.
Okay, so the discussion back and forth about whether it's winter peaking, summer peaking, from the system's point of view, designing for that peak capacity, it's irrelevant whether it's winter, summer, spring, or fall, correct?
That's correct. You would design for peak demand.
So I'm assuming that information that the peak is determined or how it's determined is available. Does ORS have that information? Has that been verified and confirmed?
Yes, Commissioner, that's verified as part of this proceeding because we allocate our variable environmental as well as our DER costs on the peak demand allocation each year. And I would also point out that that's available in the company's annual FERC Form 1 filing. So any person interested could go out there publicly to the FERC website and get a copy of the Form 1 and verify that peak demand number as well.
And that's acquired from metering data?
Correct.
Do you know what percentage of fuel cost are, I guess, relative to the total operating cost?
I was thinking, I'm sorry, go ahead, Commissioner. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's okay. I was making sure I expressed it correctly.
Okay. Well, I guess a good proxy for total operating costs is the revenue requirement, because those are recovering all the expenses as well as taxes, as well as cost of capital and so forth. So I think as our operating or electric sales revenues are probably right around $2 billion. And the fuel costs that we incurred during calendar year 2020 were around $520 million that are being reviewed by the commission in this proceeding. So I would say about 25% of the company's revenue requirement or total expenses are being evaluated as part of this proceeding.
Okay. So if the, I guess, percentage of fuel being, let's say, a little less than 50%, I think, is natural gas, correct? Of fuel.
Yes. Yes, sir.
And I'm not quick enough or sharp enough with the math right now, but I was assuming it'd be directly related, or that if it's 25% of the total operating cost, and if 50% of the fuel cost, so it would be 50% of that 25%. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's roughly correct. And I just want to be clear that during the test period, we had a little over $240 million that were natural gas related costs. So that was the approximate amount of natural gas related expenses in calendar year 2020.
Okay. I was just trying to get my head around that. So roughly 12 to 13%, because, thinking in terms of if the cost of natural gas goes up, and certainly, that can vary. In essence, that would be affecting 12 to 13% of the total operating cost. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I believe if you take a look at Mr. Delp's testimony he presented earlier, and you look at the gas capacity, certainly any type of impact on gas costs are going to cause sensitivities in our fuel costs for sure.
And as I was looking at, excuse me, I think it's Mr. Brookmeyer was going through the nuclear fuel part of that, which was very interesting, by the way. How those costs are determined, fluctuate, how they've been down, and what world events can affect those. And as I recall, the nuclear component in Dominion's energy production is around, what was it, 23% or 26%? What was that?
From a generation mix perspective, our nuclear, give me just a moment here, and I don't want to give you a bad number. From a generation mix perspective, with purchase power, that number was around 21.73%.
21%. Okay, 22.
Yep.
Around
Yes, sir.
22. Okay, anyway, I was, just kind of thinking about those numbers and thinking about, the importance of, a robust and diverse portfolio of energy options. Hopefully not putting all of our eggs in one basket. What's the proper dispersal? I don't know. But you've answered my questions, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any further questions?
Vice Chair Belzer, this is Commissioner Williams.
Commissioner Williams, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Hello, Mr. Rook. Good to see you.
Hello. Good to see you too, Commissioner.
Thank you. I did a little bit of looking in the state code, and so I have a question from that for you. 58-27-8865E says the commission may offset to the extent considered appropriate the cost of fuel recovered through sales of power pursuant to interconnection agreements with neighboring electrical utilities against the fuel cost to be recovered. So my question was just, were there any interconnection agreements of that nature during the review period or planned that were put into effect in the forecasted period?
Commissioner, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Well, no, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
So I think that particular part of the statute is actually referring to sales that the company makes. So if the company were to make a sale to a neighboring utility or another utility, then any fuel cost used to generate that power should be credited back to retail customers, because obviously that fuel cost was expended and it was used to supply a sale all system. And so our customers shouldn't have to pay for that cost or bear that cost. And so my understanding of the statute is that's what that particular piece is referring to. If I'm hearing you correctly or reading that right.
That's generally what I understood. And so I'm just asking if that if that circumstance existed, and if it did, is that crediting taking place?
Yes, ma'am, it is. You can see if you look at exhibit, if I can point you quickly to exhibit number 1 of my testimony. And that should be, if I can get there myself.
Yeah.
For base fuel costs. And,
so I want to be in the original direct, right?
Sure, that will work just fine.
I think they're bigger there, so I'm going to stick with that one.
Okay, fair enough. I think if you look at line 4, and I'm looking at exhibit number AWR1, page 1 of 2, and I look at line 4, it says less fuel costs in intersystem sales. And you see those amounts there coming across on line 4. And then also, if you come down to the next group or the next table below, row 20, less fuel cost in intersystem sales. So those amounts, when the company makes off-system sales, are deducted right there, and that's showing you where that takes place. And we also do that for our variable environmental costs as well. You'll see those similar type adjustments made there.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the education and enjoying learning, and appreciate your helping me with that. I have one other question, and it has to do with the nuclear fuel batch design cost. I was asking Mr. Brookmeyer about that, and what I recall is there, well, the big question is, from what you understand about that cost, is there a better, is what you're proposing going to be a lesser cost to the customer than what you were previously doing? Is it the same? How does it impact the customer?
I think it's effectively the same, Commissioner. We're taking expenses, we're removing expenses from base rate recovery and inserting them into the fuel cost recovery side. As Mr. Brookmeyer mentioned, that it's consistent with how the Dominion utilities have handled it. And we've also spoken with our IOU counterparts at Duke and discovered that they have those costs incorporated as well. So it's consistent there. And so essentially you're taking those expenses and you're capitalizing that labor now. And as the company has stated in testimony, it researched the amount in its rate case test year. And just for the record, it's about $248,450 was the amount. And so that would be the amount that we would credit. That's an annual amount. And we would credit about $20,700 a month back to retail fuel costs beginning in May if the commission approves this. And that's to ensure that no costs are recovered twice or double counted anywhere in any way. And so that's what the company is proposed here. And again, just to put that into context, that $248,000 compared to 41.2 million of nuclear costs in calendar year 2020 is less than a percent. As a matter of fact, I got 0.6%. So certainly $240,000 is a lot of money to me, but relative to overall nuclear fuel expense, it's a very, very small amount that we're talking about here.
And is the corollary true that we can, even though it's a small amount, it's a small amount we would not see in base rate going forward?
That's correct. Yes, you have it right.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. Commissioners, any further questions?
Madam Vice Chair, Stelton Powers.
Commissioner Powers, please go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Rooks.
Sir.
I'm still having a problem with the use of the winter peak as some sort of sole measure. I just feel like people aren't moving down here in droves just because of our charm and hospitality. They're moving down here because we don't have winter. A large part of the state, particularly coastal, suffers very little, even freezing weather. I mean, people have banana trees, lime trees, lemon trees down around Beaufort and Charleston. Should there not be some consideration for the summer peak in making that determination?
Well, I think, Commissioner, to your point about winter peak, our all-time system peak is a winter peak. So it's 4,970 megawatts. So the all-time highest demand set on the DESC system was during a winter peak.
Well, I know we had a 1,000-year flood recently that affected places like Columbia, but that's a 1,000-year flood. I'm just having a hard time grasping that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioners, any further questions? Dominion, any redirect?
Madam Vice Chair, Michael Anselmo, we have no redirect for Mr. Rooks.
Thank you.
And that concludes our case. If Mr. Rooks could be excused.
Mr. Rooks, thank you for your testimony today. You may stand down.
Thank you.
As that concludes Dominion's case, we will next go, let's see, no witnesses from the energy users, so we will go to SACE and CCL.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Kurt Ebersbach here for SACE and CCL, and we would call Tom Beach to the stand.
Mr. Beach, please, when we get you and the court reporter up, please raise your hand to be sworn.
I'm here.
Sir, in the testimony you're about to give, do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Beach, would you please state your name for the record?
Yes, my name is first initial R, Thomas Beach, B-E-A-C-H.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm a principal consultant at Cross Border Energy.
Mr. Beach, did you prepare and cause to be pre-filed in this docket on March 16th, 2021, direct testimony consisting of 19 pages in question and answer format?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I have two small corrections. On page 3 at line 7, there's a reference to the generic proceeding docket. That should read docket number 2019-182-E, not 2019-82-E. And then a similar change at page 5, line 11, where the Commission's 2015 order adopting the solar valuation methodology is referenced. This should read order number 2015-194, not 2015-914.
Subject to those changes, if I asked you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Vice Chair, at this time, I would move that the pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Beach, as corrected from the stand, be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Beach's pre-filed direct testimony as corrected from the stand will be entered into the record as if given orally.
Thank you. Mr. Beach, did you prepare and include as attachments to your direct testimony 3 exhibits labeled RTB1, RTB2, and RTB3?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or additions to your exhibits?
No, I do not.
Madam Vice Chair, I move to have the exhibits attached to Mr. Beach's direct testimony, which are labeled exhibits RTB 1, 2, and 3, entered into the record as the next composite exhibit.
The exhibits attached to Mr. Beach's direct pre-filed testimony labeled RTB1 through RTB3 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 7 and entered into the record of this case. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Beach, did you also cause to be pre-filed in this docket on March 30th, 2021, rebuttal testimony consisting of 12 pages in question and answer format?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
Yes, on page 1 at line 11, there's again a reference to the generic proceeding docket. It should read docket number 2019-182-E, not 2019-82-E.
Subject to that change, if the same questions in your rebuttal testimony were asked at the hearing today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Vice Chair, I would move to have Mr. Beach's pre-filed rebuttal testimony as corrected from the stand entered into the record as though given orally.
Mr. Beach's rebuttal testimony as corrected from the stand will be entered into the record as if given orally. Thank you.
Mr. Beach, did you prepare a summary of your direct and rebuttal testimony today?
Yes, I have.
With the chair's leave, would you please read your summary to the commission?
Yes. I'm R. Thomas Beach, Principal Consultant of Cross Border Energy, and Commissioners, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. My testimony today builds upon testimony that I've offered to the Commission in prior related proceedings concerning the benefit cost methodology for valuing distributed energy resources in South Carolina. Here, I address how the value of distributed solar resources should be assessed in this fuel cost recovery proceeding. I recommend using the cost-benefit analysis filed in the generic proceeding, that's docket number 2019-182-E, which is attached to my testimony as exhibit RTB2, to quantify the full slate of benefits and costs of distributed energy resources on the Dominion system. My testimony provides some background by describing the cost-benefit methodology adopted by this commission in its order 2015-194. I observe that all the benefits of distributed energy resources are quantifiable and Where there's uncertainty about the magnitude of a specific benefit or cost, the default should be not to assign a zero value to that benefit or cost. The Commission instead should establish a reasonable value based on an examination that spans a range of reasonable values for the benefit or cost. My testimony then explains how I derived a value for distributed energy resources using the methodology approved in Order 2015-194. I conclude that the benefits of distributed solar resources outweigh the cost to Dominion and its ratepayers. I recommend that the Commission reject Dominion's proposed value of solar because it significantly undervalues customer-sited solar generation. Continuing to allow the utility to use or calculate zero values for several of the components of the value stack, such as avoided transmission and distribution capacity costs, leads to an over-recovery of the net metering incentive that's set in this docket. It also creates the false impression that there is a potential future cost shift in several of the solar choice tariffs that are before the Commission in docket number 2020-229-E. And in this regard, I'd like to address the concern about avoided transmission and distribution costs being zero because Dominion in some years peaks in the winter. Even if the system peaks in the winter, many of the substations and circuits on the utility system are still likely to peak on summer days when loads are almost as high. When various elements of a utility's transmission and distribution system peak is a localized situation. And the analysis that we did looked at exactly that, because we did not just look at the hourly system peak load, we looked at hourly loads at every Dominion transmission and distribution substation on its system. So we captured those local conditions in when the various elements of the Dominion T&D system peak in our analysis, unlike an analysis that the company did that it appears to just have looked at when the system as a whole peaks. When all the benefits of customer-sited solar are fully and fairly quantified, the value of solar exceeds Dominion's retail rate. Consequently, there is no under recovery of costs by the utility that must be recovered as a NEM incentive through the fuel clause. I conclude by recommending that the Commission adopt the value of solar shown in Exhibit RTB-2 attached to my testimony, or derive a substitute value that is consistent with the analysis and recommendations set forth in my testimony. My surrebuttal testimony responds to the rebuttal testimony filed by witnesses Eric Bell and Margot Everett on behalf of Dominion. I show that these witnesses continue to disregard or underestimate quantifiable benefits of distributed solar that have been widely recognized across the country, including by the Duke utilities regulated by this Commission. I note that now is an appropriate time for this Commission to reevaluate the components of the value of solar. Not only have 5 years passed since the Commission first adopted the NEM methodology, but the Energy Freedom Act, Act 62, enacted in May 2019, required the Commission to conduct such a reassessment in the generic docket 2019-182-E. To the extent the Commission revisits and revises the values contained in the methodology, those changes should be applied toward the calculation of the NEM incentive in this proceeding. This concludes the summary of my pre-filed testimony.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Mr. Beach. Madam Vice Chair, Mr. Beach is now available for cross-examination and questions from the commissioners.
Questions from South Carolina Energy Users Committee?
No questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Questions from Office of Regulatory Staff?
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
questions from Dominion Energy?
Madam Chair, this is Mitchell Willoughby. We do have some questions of Mr. Beach.
Please proceed.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Beach. My name is Mitchell Willoughby. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Pleasure to be with you this afternoon, although I guess it is early afternoon where you are.
It is indeed.
I want to talk with you a little bit about, you just mentioned Act 62. So I want to start my discussion with you focusing on that act. Would you agree with me that Act 62 made it very clear that this commission, in its analysis of the benefit of renewable energy sources, was not to engage in cost shifting, so that the cost of solar would be borne by customers that were not themselves solar generators?
I would agree with you that that was one of the considerations in Act 62. And I believe that the language of the act, which said something about reducing cost shifts to the greatest extent practicable, or something to that effect. So I certainly would not read Act 62 as prohibiting any cost shift. But I would agree with you that cost shifts were a concern of the legislature when it enacted Act 62, but it was not the only concern.
So would it be true that it's your testimony that you can do a little bit of cost shift, but you should just be careful about the amount of cost shift? Is that your testimony?
Well, my testimony would be that the Act 62 asked the commission to balance a number of considerations, and the cost shift issue was one of those considerations. So it certainly would be my opinion that the commission might find it reasonable to allow a certain amount of cost shift in order to fulfill the other important goals of Act 62.
Would you say, and is it your testimony, that the analysis that you've done and presented in this case, where you come up with a benefit for a solar generation of 14.2 cents, did I get that right? That your recommendation is that the company, the solar benefit be defined as 14.2 cents per kilowatt hour?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And I rounded the number off a little bit, but it's roughly 14.2 cents. Would it be true then that in your calculation of that 14.2 cents, which you acknowledge is higher than the company's retail rate under rate 8, which is about 11.6 cents. So you're roughly not quite 3 cents above the company's retail rate that it charges to its rate 8 residential customer. But would it be fair to say that in calculating that 14.2 cents, that you did in fact shift some cost in reaching that calculation?
No, I don't think I shifted costs. I don't think that's correct.
So in doing that calculation, then, well, let me ask this. When you say shifted costs, what do you mean that you didn't shift costs? You did not include in your calculation some cost that would be borne by the company's other ratepayers.
The purpose of the calculation is to determine the value of this resource for the Dominion system. And the calculation's done on a marginal basis. and marginal costs can sometimes exceed the company's embedded cost retail rate, and that's what I found in my analysis. And all of that, that simply indicates that this resource provides a benefit to Dominion and its ratepayers, because in the long run, which was also, the perspective that I used in my analysis, these resources will reduce costs for Dominion and its ratepayers. So that's what the analysis shows.
And it would be true that Dominion Energy and its proposal in this testimony calculated the avoided cost, because that's what we're doing, is calculating the cost that the company avoids because this energy resource is on its system, correct?
Yes, I would agree with that.
So let's look at a commission order in 2015. Well, I don't think it's in 2015. It's in 2019 as a result of its analysis of Act 62. And let's see if I'm able to share my screen here. May have to get a little help here. So Laura Lee, come and see if we can get this order up here. The one with the, there we go. Perfect. I'm going to show you order number 2019-847 and docket number 2019-184E. And let's see if I can make this work. Can you see that?
It's the text is really small. I don't know if you can make it larger.
Let's see if I can. Help me make this large. I'm going to lose, Madam Chair, my technology award here. Is that a little larger?
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you.
Perfect. So I've highlighted a couple of things. This is actually page 11 of the Commission's order dated December 9, 2019. So just a year and a half ago. And let me read this to you. The General Assembly, through Act number 62, encouraged the development of renewable energy resources. And then I highlighted, it also made clear that revenue recovery, cost allocation, and rate designs of utilities should be just and reasonable, and it established procedures to ensure that QS are properly compensated for the energy they produce, as is required by PURPA, while at the same time mandating that costs not be shifted onto utility customers in an effort to subsidize such programs. And then it cites SC Code annotated 58-41-05, which is the codified form of Act 62. Did I read that correctly?
I believe you read it correctly.
So would you agree with me that using the words mandating that costs not be shifted is not discretionary?
Well, I don't, I have a couple things here. I have not reviewed this order. I don't know what it's about. I also recall that Act 62 had separate provisions for QFs that are separate from the net metering provisions of Act 62. And I would need to make sure that this order is not just, it appears to be just referring to the QF portion of Act 62, not necessarily to the net metering portion. And so I would want a much fuller context before I would agree with that characterization.
So, well, let me go back then to, you agree that this language mandates. You're just not sure whether this language has some limited application to the net energy metering, distributed energy resources, correct?
It may not be, applicable to them at all is my concern.
But you just quoted earlier in this discussion that you and I are having some language that you recall from Act 62, where you indicated and quoted that the commission should attempt to the maximum extent possible to prevent cost shifting. Isn't that what you said?
I think I said something like the greatest extent practicable. I would need to review exactly what the language says, but my interpretation, and I'm not a lawyer, of that language was that it did not require all cost shifts to be reduced to zero, for example. And again, there are other purposes of Act 62 that needed to be balanced with the cost shift concern.
But even with your quote of what you recall, you do recall that the effort should be made by the commission to the maximum extent practicable to keep from costs being shifted to those folks that are customers that do not participate in the distributed energy resource program, correct?
Generally, sure, I agree with that. The reason we're here is to examine that issue. And I certainly recognize that the potential for cost shifts is an issue with these resources that is being examined in many states. And it's a completely appropriate issue to examine.
Vice Chair Belser, and I apologize, Attorney Willoughby, I hate to interrupt. I think this is Kate Mixon with Jason CCL. I think my co-counsel Kurt Ebersbach is having some technical issues and is no longer able to hear any of the testimony. We would prefer to try to maybe resolve those issues before.
Hold on just a second. Let me see where we are.
Thank you.
Our technical folks need for the screen to be unshared, Mr. Willoughby, so that they can see what's going on with. She's having difficulty. There we go. Thank you. I saw Mr. Ebersbach, I think, but I don't know. Can you hear us? Mr. Ebersbach, can you hear us? Mr. Ebersbach, can you hear us at the commission?
don't think that he's able to hear for some reason, and it looks like we're not able to hear him either.
But if he can't hear me tell him that, how am I supposed to? I'm talking with our production folks. I tell you what, can we do this? We've been going about an hour and a half. Let's take a 15-minute break. See if we can text Mr. Ebersbach, get him on the phone or something, and see if we can get him reconnected. I apologize for interrupting the cross-examination this way, but the council does need to be able to hear.
No worries, Madam Chair. We're happy to accommodate.
Okay, it is about 3:36. We will come back about 3:50. See where we are. Thank you for your patience, parties. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for accommodating us on that break. We are back in the afternoon session in docket number 2021-2-E, matter involving annual review of base rates for fuel costs for Dominion Energy South Carolina. Let's take an good appearance of the commissioners. In the hearing room, we have Commissioner Caston and Vice Chair Belser. Virtually, I see Commissioner Thomas and Commissioner Irvin and Commissioner Powell. Do we have Commissioner Williams? She's there, I'm told. There she is. Thank you. So we have all our commissioners today. I neglected, I apologize, I neglected at the beginning of the hearing to state that our chairman, Williams, is on military leave today, and that is why he is not with us in this hearing. Okay, we were, Mr. Ebersbach, do we have you back?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair. And before we get started, I just want to say that I did get cut off the moment that order was put up on the screen and was not able to hear, but I did want to state an objection for the record, which is that I don't believe this witness has any familiarity with the order he's being shown. Moreover, he's being shown only one page of it. So I question the relevance and the lack of foundation to ask this witness any questions about it.
We're going to let Mr. Willoughby proceed. If the witness is not familiar with it, he can certainly, he's made some of that clear, and we can take that for what it's worth when we are deliberating. But Mr. Willoughby, I need for you to back up a little bit because Mr. Ebersbach was cut off. So if you could kind of retrace your steps thus far from when you shared your screen.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I won't share the screen again if that's okay with the chair. I don't think there's any need to do that. And as you pointed out, Madam Chair, Mr. Beach indicated that he was not a witness in the proceeding that led to the order and the avoided costs docket. But my point was, as I think everyone knew, was to make sure that the shifting of costs was an issue that was clearly made known to everybody as far as what the statutes may entail. And I think I'll wind up retracing just a step or two in my remaining cross-examination of Mr. Beach. Can you still hear me, Mr. Beach?
Yes, I can.
And I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you for still being with us. I want to talk with you just on some general terms that I think we can agree on. You would agree with me that the company, one of its goals is to provide reliable service to its customers during all weather conditions, correct?
I would hope that would be a goal, yes.
And that's a goal that you share, correct?
Certainly.
And even when you do your analysis about the cost and benefits of the distributed energy program, you do so knowing full well that the company has the obligation to provide service to the customers even when solar is not able to generate, correct?
Of course.
And it would also be true, wouldn't it, that the company has to size its generation, size its transmission, size its distribution. In other words, construct capacity that is available to serve, as Commissioner Caston has indicated, during the most demanding period that the company may experience, correct?
Yes, I generally agree with that, yes.
Yeah. You're not advocating that the commission should have controlled brownouts or blackouts, are you?
No, not at all, of course.
You've included a number of societal benefits, in your analysis that you've done, that you've talked about. Now, I believe those societal benefits result in shifting costs, as Ms. Everett indicated. Do you disagree with me that those societal benefits that you mentioned are in fact shifting costs from the solar generator to a non-solar generator?
No, I would disagree with that. I think it's important to realize that I quantified some societal benefits in the analysis that I provided in the net metering docket, but that quantification is not at all used in my recommendation in this case. I'm not proposing that anyone pay any money to anybody based on the quantification of those societal benefits. I provided that quantification for the Commission's consideration simply to provide some context for those societal benefits. I mean, we often talk about societal benefits like a clean environment or hedging, a clean environment or reducing air pollution. But we don't often put numbers to those benefits, which I think can be helpful in appreciating the relative magnitude of those benefits. But I'm not proposing at all that any costs get shifted from one group of ratepayers to another based on those numbers. I'm simply providing that to provide some context and an indication of relative size in those societal benefits compared to the direct benefits that I think are relevant to the numbers. So I hope that clarifies that characterization that I'm trying to shift costs from one group of ratepayers to another by providing those societal benefits is simply not correct.
So let's examine that. I want to share another screen with you. And this is and this particular screen will be hold on one second here. So I'm going to share this. This is our rate to 8 to Can you see that? Let's see if I can make it larger.
Mr. Willoughby, it's visible, but it needs to be larger to be read.
Okay, perfect. Let's see if we can do that. Is that better?
I can see it.
Perfect. And there's only one point I want to make here, Mr. Beach. This is the company's current schedule, residential rate schedule 8. And you will note there that the company current rate for the first 800 kilowatt hours of service is at 11.6 cents per kilowatt hour, summer and winter. Do you see that?
I do see that, yes.
And if I juxtapose your number is 14.28 cents. If I juxtapose that next to 11.602 per kilowatt hour, you would admit, would you not, that your proposal basically says that the company should pay to distributed energy resource customers an amount per kilowatt hour that exceeds the company's retail rate, correct?
I'm not proposing that, I'm certainly not proposing that, since the benefits exceed the costs, it's not my proposal that, non-participating ratepayers should pay extra money to solar customers. That is not my proposal at all. Because the 14 cents in benefits, which are calculated on a marginal basis, exceed the embedded cost rate of 11.6 cents, it simply shows that net metering at the full retail rate is cost effective. That's the conclusion that can be drawn. I'm not trying to, propose an additional subsidy for solar customers. That's clear.
Well, I'm not sure that it is. When I read your testimony to say that you were proposing that the company paid a DER providers a 14.28 cents. So that is not your proposal.
No, not at all. It's not my proposal.
What are you proposing then?
What I'm proposing is that that there's no need to recover a NEM incentive from ratepayers, and the NEM incentive that's now included in Dominion's fuel clause is overstated, in my opinion, and can be reduced to zero, and that would benefit Dominion's ratepayers by reducing their rates by that component.
So, and tell me, define for me, Mr. Beach, what the number would be that you're proposing.
Well, my understanding is that Dominion today recovers a NEM incentive as part of their fuel clause. And I believe that NEM incentive is something like the difference between the 11.6 cent rate and what has been approved for avoided costs in prior fuel clause cases, which is somewhere around 3 to 4 cents per kilowatt hour. Based on my analysis, the avoided costs are actually higher than 11.6 cents. So that NEM incentive can be reduced to zero, and that rate component can be taken out of Dominion's rates.
Well, you reviewed Mr. Eric Bell's testimony, did you not?
No, I did not actually review his testimony in any detail.
So you don't know then on table 2 of Mr. Bell's testimony that he basically calculated, and I do find that interesting, Mr. Beach, that you provided critical testimony of Mr. Bell's analysis that you don't even remember reading it. That's pretty nifty. But
Madam Vice Chair, we don't need the commentary from counsel.
The witness is
sustained on that objection.
So look at, do you have Mr. Bell's testimony available to you, Mr. Beach?
I do not.
Well, let me read from table 2 for you. I don't have this in a position to share it with you right now, but except subject to check, that Mr. Bell says that in his calculations on behalf of the company, that the total value of NEM distributed energy resources proposed values is for the current period would be 3.1 cents, and I'm rounding that off. And for the 10-year levelized would be 3.8 cents. Does that sound about what you remember his proposed NEM values to be?
Yes, I just testified that it was between 3 and 4 cents. Yes.
Okay. So it's 3.1 on the current period, 3.8 for the 10-year levelized. You haven't done a calculation to really determine what the avoided cost is, as I now understand it. What you've done is a calculation that you claim demonstrates the benefit of the net energy metering, a DER program, to exceed what Mr. Bell has calculated, correct?
Well, I don't accept your characterization. I think I have calculated the avoided costs. And what I concluded is they exceed the current retail rate.
And what you've concluded that the avoided cost is 14.28 cents. That's what your testimony concludes, correct?
Yes.
But what you've testified here today, which was not clear to me from your testimony, is that you're not recommending that the commission approve that as the avoided cost, correct?
Well, I'm recommending that the commission realize that the avoided cost is higher than the retail rate, so there's no need to have a NEM incentive component of Dominion's rates.
Okay. So, but let me be clear. You're not recommending that the commission approve as the avoided cost in this case, your number of 14.28 cents. Is that correct?
Well, the commission could adopt my number and then conclude from that it can reduce the NEM incentive to zero. I think the key thing that the commission has to decide in this case is what is the right number for the NEM incentive to put into your rates. And by adopting a 14-cent avoided cost, it could reach the conclusion that the right number for the NEM incentive should be zero.
Okay, and are you right? Do I understand that to mean then that you're recommending that the commission adopt as the avoided cost for the net energy metering program, your number of 14.28 cents?
Yes.
Thank you very much. That's all the questions I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Willoughby. Questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Caston.
Afternoon, Mr. Beach.
Good afternoon. Good to see you.
You too. Page 2 and 3 of your rebuttal, where you talk about carbon compliance costs are not zero for ratepayers. You say because the utilities are planning today and spending money today to reduce their carbon emissions through acquisitions of new renewable generation, replacement of old coal plants. How does carbon compliance costs relate to the utilities planning to reduce carbon emissions?
Well, if there's...
Go ahead.
Well, if they're spending money to reduce carbon emissions, then that's what I would consider to be, costs related to carbon regulations.
So are you saying that simply planning to reduce carbon emissions equates to a guarantee to eliminate or reduce carbon emissions? I mean, is that in essence what you're saying?
Well, I think that if you look at the IRPs, they're of just about every utility in the U.S., there is a focus on reducing carbon emissions, and utilities are planning to acquire more renewables to do that. They're planning to phase out coal and replace it with generally a mix of natural gas and renewables. And they often include a carbon cost in their analysis in IRPs in order to figure out, what their strategy should be. So I think that that's pretty clear that utilities are putting a cost on carbon.
So the fact that they're planning to eliminate carbon emissions by virtue of some of the plans they have is a cost, a carbon compliance cost, you're saying, by just the choice for them to do that, even though there's no requirement for them to do that.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by requirement. There are parts of the country where there are formal, carbon regulation markets, and like in California and in the U.S. Northeast, where there is a formal, market for carbon. But most utilities in the U.S. are under state regulation required to do integrated resource planning and plan where they're going to, get their resources for the future. And as I just, described, most of those resource planning exercises include evaluating various strategies for reducing carbon emissions, often by placing an imputed price on carbon, even though there's not a formal market for carbon in their service territory.
All right, but currently in South Carolina, and nationally for that matter, if there are no federal or state requirements or anything quantifying carbon emissions, how would we evaluate that? Would it not be fairly subjective?
Well, no, I think it's one of the reasons for using carbon costs in the integrated resource plans is precisely to make it more objective, and to show what to further illuminate what the costs of reducing carbon emissions potentially are. Because obviously there are cost trade-offs between, for example, building a natural gas plant versus procuring renewables. And those trade-offs can be illuminated if you compare those resources using a certain value for carbon, because the natural gas plant will have carbon emissions while the renewables will not. And so using a carbon value, as most utilities in the US, including the ones in South Carolina, do, is a way to illuminate those trade-offs. And it recognizes that there is a cost to reducing carbon emissions.
Okay, I guess along those lines then, if carbon producing generation is not currently taxed or presently taxed, how can these costs be avoided if they currently don't exist? In other words, if it not saying it won't, it currently doesn't, so how can there be avoided cost if there is no cost currently existing?
Well, I'm not sure I think I disagree with you, Commissioner, that there's no cost currently existing, because I think utilities are considering carbon emissions to be a cost. And that's what they're evaluating in their resource plans. It's not a regulation that that the state is necessarily imposing on the utilities. but it's a consideration that they generally recognize is something that needs to be taken into account and factored into their cost analyses.
And well, that may or may not be, but if I understood previous witnesses from Dominion, while they may be planning to do something by X year, if I understood them correctly, they're saying there's zero cost now. So they're figuring zero. So while they may be planning to do something, currently they're figuring zero. So why is that any more wrong than right?
Well, Commissioner, in this case, we're not just looking at this year. We're looking at least a 10-year period, and I would argue it should probably be a 25-year period if you're going to look at, a full life cycle of costs. And over that longer term planning horizon, the cost of mitigating carbon is definitely there.
All right, let me switch gears on you if I may.
Sure.
Earlier, and it kind of went by me so quickly, I just didn't catch it or grasp it. You were talking, I think, about the summer-winter peak issue. And did I understand you to say that you had reviewed the Dominion, I guess, meter records or something and looked at isolated areas or different areas to determine that summer was the peak, or did I totally miss that when you were talking?
Sure, you got part of it. So we didn't just look at the system load data for Dominion. We looked at the hourly load data for every transmission and distribution substation on the Dominion system. And the point, Commissioner, is that, the system may peak in the wintertime, but if you look at the transmission and at the grid, the transmission and distribution system more granularly, and you look at each substation, not all of the substations peak at the same time as the system as a whole. And there will be some substations that will be summer peaking, even if the system is winter peaking. And so we looked at when the T&D system peaks on a much more granular level than I think the utility did. And that's how we came up with, a significant, that solar can make a significant contribution to reducing the peaks at those, broadly distributed substations across Dominion service territory in the summertime. And some of the peaks that, some of the hours that are where the loads are within 10% of the annual peak, many of those hours occur in the summertime at many of Dominion's T&D substations.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm certainly not claiming to be an electrical system designer, engineer, know very little about it. I can say from, say, a water utilities perspective, and it would be similar probably for wastewater too, it would not be unusual to have different parts of the system to have different demands. For example, we may have a more industrialized area in that part of the system, and there would be bigger demands in that part of the system. So there would be bigger tanks, bigger storage, possibly bigger lines, maybe even bigger pump stations. But the generation itself, the treatment plant, was sized specifically for peak. It didn't matter when the peak was. It was irrelevant. What mattered was what was the peak. And we had to design the infrastructure for that peak, especially the generation, a transmission from the plant and then the areas around it that way. So are you saying that because the hourly demands at the substations, some of them had I guess, peaks or demands similar to what the winter peak was, that the summer peak should be considered in some of those different areas of the transmission distribution system?
Well, what I'm saying is both that, on the Dominion system, the winter peak may be the absolute highest peak that the company's ever encountered, but that's not the only hour that can be challenging. The summer, there are a lot of years where the summer peak has been the highest, and the summer peaks are close to the winter peaks. And in addition, when you look at it on a locational basis, there are some substations that will peak in the summertime, even if the system as a whole is peaking in the winter, just because of their location. You can imagine a substation that's up in the mountains where it gets colder in the winter is likely to be more likely to be a winter peaking substation than one that's in the lowlands where it's warmer, nearer the coast, and that substation may typically peak in the summer. And so, that's one of the reasons we looked at the substation load data rather than just looking at the system load data, was to try to capture those variations.
So if that's the case, then should rates be looked at relative to where you live, the temperature where you live, the average temperature, or maybe what substation you're fed off of, because it may be leaning more toward industrial versus residential? Would that make sense?
Well, there's in setting rates, there are considerations that you could do that. It could get very complicated, and I don't think many utilities in the U.S. have locational rates. There are, for example, here in California, we do have somewhat locational rates because every customer gets a certain amount of baseline electricity that comes at a lower cost. And depending on where you live, you get a larger or smaller amount of that baseline electricity. So that essentially results in a different rate by location. But that's tends to be the exception. Most U.S. utilities tend to have just a single set of rates for customers. But in looking at costs and looking at issues like how does solar contribute to reducing the utilities costs, it may be very important to look at things on a locational basis, because conditions on the grid do vary from place to place.
So, am I understanding you're not disputing that the peak occurs in the winter, the peak time, the peak day, but that there are higher times than others at some substation served areas, and that those areas should be looked at differently from a peaking factor? Is that?
Yeah, basically, yes. I think that's correct. And again, the winter peak doesn't happen every year. There certainly have been some very large winter peaks with the polar vortex, for example. But there also are years where Dominion has peaked in the summertime.
I hope there's not one every year.
I hope not either. Or I wouldn't want to see South Carolina become a skiing destination.
Nor would I. Thank you very much, Mr. Beach.
You're welcome.
Other commissioners, questions for Mr. Beach? Hearing none.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Urban?
thank you. Dr. Beach, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
I want to go back to Act 62. We talked a little bit when Mr. Willoughby was cross-examining you about the requirement that we have to eliminate any cost shift or subsidization associated with net metering to the greatest extent practicable. We didn't get a chance to talk about the other two statutory requirements. So I want to ask you about those.
Commissioner Urban, can you turn your camera on, please?
Yes, ma'am. I apologize. Can you see me now? Okay. I apologize, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Beach, the first requirement of Act 62 requires us to, quote, build upon the successful deployment of solar generating capacity through Act 236 of 2014 to continue enabling market-driven private investment in distributed energy resources across the state by reducing regulatory and administrative burdens to customer installation and utilization of on-site distributed energy resources. I'd like to hear you just to briefly address what you think that requirement, how our commission could meet that requirement. It's a statutory mandate.
Sure. I think that's when I answered that question, I spoke of Act 62, including requirements that needed to be balanced with reducing cost shifts, and that's certainly one of them. I think that it's appeared to me that the legislature's intent was that South Carolina build upon the successful solar market that was implemented under Act 236. And so that requires you to take a close look at what kind of tariffs will be necessary going forward to ensure that customers still have a reasonable economic opportunity to invest in solar. And that may require, it's possible that may require that you not completely eliminate a cost shift in order to achieve a balance where you have both a robust solar market and you have, at the same time, you've taken steps to reduce any cost shift that may be there.
And one of the things perhaps that you would look at would be the penetration of rooftop solar in South Carolina, right?
Yeah, that's certainly an indication of how robust the market is.
Now, last time I looked, California was #1. That doesn't surprise you, does it?
Well, we're #1 in terms of the number of systems. In terms of the percentage of customers who have solar, I think Hawaii is far and away #1.
But based on capacity, or gigawatt capacity, California is #1. I believe they have 10.67 gigawatts. Does that sound about right?
Yes, that's very close.
Whereas South Carolina's way down the list at number 16, we only have 0.27 gigawatts. So that's one measure of penetration of the South Carolina market. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. And so that takes me back to Act 62. The second requirement of Act 62 is that we not disrupt the solar market. And so if the payback for rooftop solar generators is substantially reduced to the point that they can't make the payback, that's going to have a disruptive effect on the South Carolina solar market, isn't it?
Yes, if you if you increase the paybacks substantially, that will have a big effect on the market, no question.
And that's what happened in states like Nevada that tried to go whole hog in trying to do away with any cost shift. The solar industry essentially left, didn't they?
That's right.
Similar, something like that happened similarly in Hawaii, correct?
Yeah, I think there was, when they ended net metering, there was a period of several years where their market kind of came to a halt.
So that's not the outcome the General Assembly wants, apparently, in South Carolina. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that they were trying to avoid that scenario, given the language of Act 62.
In fact, of the three requirements, two of them speak to building upon and not disrupting the solar industry in our state, correct?
Yep.
So it must have been pretty important to the General Assembly in terms of their legislative intent to be sure that we have a viable marketplace and that customers are incentivized to participate. Do you agree?
I would agree, yes.
Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you about is in your look around the country at other jurisdictions, South Carolina, of course, is not the first state that's had to address net metering issues. Would you agree with me that the majority of jurisdictions that have looked at it have various studies that they've paid experts to come in and look at their state system, and the majority of those jurisdictions have concluded that the benefits outweigh the cost, or at very least, the cost shift is minimal. Would you agree with that statement?
I would agree with that statement. I think that if you look at the steps that have been taken in states like Arizona, Nevada, once they reversed their initial decision, New Hampshire, and then I would characterize the Duke settlement in South Carolina as well. Basically, states have taken a small step away from, full retail net metering. And in fact, in 2016, here in California, when the commission revised net metering, they did the same thing. They also took a small step away from full retail net metering. And I think that's what I think that most of the commissions have concluded that that's the right way to proceed, is to use gradualism, and when markets reach a fairly significant penetration, and it's time to reevaluate net metering, it's best to do it and make changes gradually so that you don't harm the market that you've created.
Would you also agree that solar battery storage costs are rapidly decreasing? They're coming down, and they're going to be a game changer for rooftop solar and going forward.
Commissioner, I certainly agree that battery storage is a game changer because it will significantly increase the value of solar systems. They can shift their output using a battery. You can shift your output to the hours of the day when the power is most valuable. In terms of costs coming down, battery costs certainly have decreased in recent years. I think there's a lot of debate about how fast those decreases are going to continue in the future. There's more uncertainty in the future about battery costs, given that a lot of batteries are going to be going into electric vehicles all around the world. There's going to be quite a demand for batteries. But I certainly agree with you that they are a game changer in terms of increasing the value of distributed solar as a resource.
And it's not just lithium-ion batteries. There's new research being done on other types of batteries that may prove to be even more cost-effective. True?
There is a lot of research on batteries. Yes, it's. I tell my kids that if you want to be the next Bill Gates, you should go into batteries.
Well, I think a lot of people are, including a lot of electric investor-owned utilities are looking at it very seriously, because it does make solar dispatchable in such a way that it can cover these peaks, both winter and summer, but particularly summer. But I appreciate your testimony today, and thank you for helping us better understand Act 62 in this docket. No further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Irvin. Commissioners, last call. Okay. Mr. Ebersbach, any redirect?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, just a few questions. Mr. Beach, you were asked some questions at the outset of Cross about the cost shifting issue. Do you recall those questions generally?
Yes.
Your testimony is that if solar is valued properly, there is no cost shift from solar customers to non-solar customers. Is that right?
Yes.
And if the company is undervaluing solar generation, is it your understanding that results in a higher NEM incentive that is then charged to all customers?
Yes, that's right.
So is it your testimony that because Dominion refuses to value certain benefits of solar that you deem real and quantifiable, they are causing all customers, including non-solar customers, to pay more than they should?
Yes, that's right.
And next, do you recall the questions that Mr. Willoughby asked you about a utility's obligation to provide service even when solar isn't generating, and the need to have a system built up to respond to system peaks?
Yes. Yeah.
So is it or is it not the case that customer solar generation tends to correlate fairly well with summer peak?
Yes, yeah, that's right.
And to the extent that customer generators are self-supplying or even exporting during those hours, is that serving to reduce stress and strain on the transmission and distribution system?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you find it odd that Dominion claims to be winter peaking, but continues to allocate costs, including the cost of the NEM incentive at issue in this proceeding, according to summer peak?
Well, I think that I don't find that they use the summer peak allocator for their cost of service to be odd. They certainly have a very strong summer peak. I think they have a lot more hours in the summer when loads are high than they do in the winter. The winter peaks tend to be, short and sharp and related to events like the polar vortex. Whereas, there obviously are extended periods of warm weather in South Carolina in the summertime.
And extreme summer weather is kind of a different animal than extreme winter weather, right? I mean, this is mechanical equipment. It's subject to wear and tear that would be related to the high temperatures that occur during summer. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah, it can be. Certainly, a lot of thermal generation during an extended heat wave. Towards the end of the heat wave, their outage rates will go up due to the sort of accumulated stress on the generators. So yes, extreme summer weather has those impacts as well as extreme winter weather.
You've testified in commission proceedings all across the country, correct?
Yes.
Is Dominion an outlier in failing to provide a non-zero value for avoided transmission and distribution capacity costs?
Madam Chair, let me object. I don't think I asked any questions in that regard, or nor did the commissioners ask any question in that regard. I've been very patient with Mr. Eversbach about him leading, but I think this question is getting into totally new area.
Mr. Eversbach.
Madam Chair, he did ask about transmission distribution capacity. I'm just following up on those questions.
Okay. Please proceed. Overrule.
Yeah, I think that it is unusual among U.S. utilities in not valuing avoided transmission and distribution. I think that there was some evidence in the net metering dockets. I think it might have been one of the ORS witnesses who introduced a graphic showing different net metering studies that have been done across the U.S. and the various components of the value of solar in those studies. I think if you look at that graphic, you'll see that almost all of those studies have a component for avoided T&D costs.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for redirect.
Any recross? Okay. Mr. Beach, thank you for your appearance and your testimony today. You may stand down.
Thank you very much.
ORS, are you ready to proceed?
We are ready to proceed, Madam Chair.
If I could get a sense from the parties here, ORS, I want you to have sufficient time to present your case as you see fit, but is everybody okay going to about 6 o'clock or so today?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
We are.
All right.
Dominion Energy is prepared to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. ORS calls its first witness, Mr. William Cleckley.
All right. Sir, if you could raise your hand. Thank you. In the testimony you're about to give, do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Cleckley, can you please state your full name and occupation for the commission?
Yes. My name is William Cleckley, and I'm employed by the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff as a senior auditor.
Thank you. And are you the same William Cleckley who pre-filed 15 pages of direct testimony in this docket on March the 16th of this year?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No, I do not.
And if I asked you today the same questions as those posed in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. ORS asks the pre-filed direct testimony of William Cleckley be read into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Cleckley's direct testimony will be read into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Cleckley, did you file as an attachment to your direct testimony a series of exhibits marked as Exhibit WCK1 through Exhibit WCK9?
Yes.
And do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to those exhibits?
No, I do not.
Thank you, Madam Chair. ORS asks that exhibits WCK1 through WCK9, which were attached to Mr. Cleckley's pre-filed direct testimony, be marked for identification, entered in the record as the next hearing exhibit.
Mr. Cleckley's direct pre-filed exhibits WCK1 through WCK9 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 8 and entered into the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Cleckley, did you also prepare 3 pages of sewer rebuttal testimony in this case?
Yes, sir.
And do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed sewer rebuttal testimony?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, ORS asks the pre-filed surrebuttal testimony of William Cleckley be entered in the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Cleckley's surrebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cleckley, do you also file as attachments to your pre-filed surrebuttal testimony 2 exhibits marked as surrebuttal exhibit WCK5 and surrebuttal WCK9?
Yes.
And do you have any edits or corrections to those exhibits?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that the surrebuttal exhibits WCK5 and WCK9, which were attached to Mr. Cleckley's pre-filed surrebuttal testimony, be marked for identification, entered in the record as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Cleckley's pre-filed surrebuttal exhibits will be marked as composite exhibit and identified as hearing exhibit 9 and entered into the record of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Cleckley, did you prepare a summary of your direct and surrebuttal testimonies in this docket?
Yes.
Could you please present it to the commission?
Sure. Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and members of the Commission. The purpose of my testimony in this proceeding is to present the results of ORS's examination of the books and records pertaining to Dominion Energy, South Carolina, Inc.'s operations under the Fuel Adjustment Clause. ORS examined and verified the monthly over-under recovery balances as recorded by the company for the actual period that ended December 2020. This involved verifying the accuracy of the monthly fuel reports filed with the Commission and testing the underlying transactions of various fuel components. I also provided surrebuttal testimony to update certain exhibits for a correction made by the company after the filing of direct testimonies. ORS agrees with the ending over and under recovery balances as stated by the company for the actual and estimated periods, as indicated on page 15 of my direct testimony and page 3 of my surrebuttal testimony. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Cleckley. Madam Chair, Mr. Cleckley is available for cross-examination or questions from the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Any questions from South Carolina Energy Users Committee?
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
SACE CCL?
Thank you, Vice Chair. This is Kate Mixon, and we have no questions for this witness.
Thank you. Dominion Energy?
This is Matt Gissendaner, and we have no questions of this witness.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions for Mr. Cleckley?
This is Commissioner Thomas.
Commissioner Thomas, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so fair disclosure here, I'm having some technical issues, so I cannot see the witnesses, but hopefully you can see and hear me okay. Can you hear me, Mr. Cleckley?
Yes, sir, I can hear you good.
Okay, thank you. First off, I'd just like to say congratulations on obtaining your South Carolina CPA license recently. Good for you.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. So, my questions really relate mostly to the potential change in the nuclear fuel costs. I don't really think you're probably the right person to ask. I'm not sure, but given you're the first guy up, then I wanted to ask you who is the most appropriate person for me to ask questions in connection with the nuclear fuel proposed changes.
Yes, sir. As far as the operational and technical details, that could be better addressed by ORS witness Seaman Wynn from the operations department.
Okay. That's kind of what I thought. Just wanted to make sure. So that's all I have for you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other commissioner questions for Mr. Cleckley? Mr. Nelson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is all that I have for Mr. Cleckley, if he could be excused as a witness.
Thank you. Mr. Cleckley, thank you for your testimony and appearance today. You may stand down.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes, Madam Chair. ORS would call as this next witness Mr. O'Neill Morgan.
Mr. Morgan, when your picture comes on the screen with the court reporter, if you'd raise your right hand to be sworn.
In the testimony you're about to give, do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Morgan, can you please state your full name and occupation for the commission?
My name is Anil Morgan, and I'm employed by the ORS as a senior energy engineer.
Thank you. And are you the same O'Neill Morgan who pre-filed 7 pages of direct testimony in this docket on March the 16th of this year?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No, I do not.
And if I asked you today the same questions as those posed in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Madam Chair, ORS asks the pre-filed direct testimony of O'Neill Morgan be read into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Morgan's direct pre-filed testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Morgan, did you file as an attachment to your direct testimony one exhibit marked as Exhibit OOM1?
Yes, I did.
And do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to that exhibit?
No, I do not.
Thank you, Madam Chair. ORS asks that Exhibit OOM1 be marked for identification and entered in the record of this case as the next hearing exhibit.
Mr. Morgan's exhibit will be marked for identification as hearing Exhibit 10 and admitted into the evidence of this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Did you also prepare 3 pages of rebuttal testimony in this case?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, ORS that the pre-filed rebuttal testimony of O'Neill Morgan be entered in the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Morgan's rebuttal pre-filed testimony will be entered into the record as if read from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, did you also file as an attachment to pre-filed rebuttal testimony one exhibit marked as rebuttal Exhibit OOM1?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any edits or corrections to that exhibit?
No, I do not.
Thank you, Madam Chair. ORS asks that rebuttal Exhibit OOM1, which was filed as attachment to Mr. Morgan's pre-filed rebuttal testimony, be marked for identification and entered in the record as the next hearing exhibit.
Mr. Morgan's rebuttal Exhibit OOM1 will be marked for identification as hearing Exhibit number 11 and admitted into the evidence of this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Morgan, do you prepare a summary of your direct and rebuttal testimonies that were filed in this docket?
Yes, I did.
Can you please present it to the commission?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Vice Chair and members of the Commission. The purpose of my testimony is to present ORS's evaluation of the company's distributed energy resource program expenses from January 2020 to April 2022, including the updates to the net energy metering program, distributed energy resources. I also provided rebuttal testimony based on the corrected and responsive direct testimony provided by the company, which resulted in adjustments to the proposed annual DERP charges. ORS reviewed the proposed annual DERP charges of $12 for residential, $73.85 for small and medium general service, and $1,200 for large general service. ORS finds that the company's DERP expenses were reasonably incurred and their calculations are in compliance with Act 236 and commission orders. In addition, ORS finds that the company updated the value of NEM distributed energy resources in accordance with Commission Order 2015-194. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Morgan is available for questions from opposing counsel or the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Question, cross-exam, South Carolina Energy Users Committee?
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
SACE and CCL?
No questions, thank you.
Dominion Energy,
No questions.
Commissioners. Mr. Morgan, let me welcome you to the Public Service Commission. I believe this is your first time testifying, and we appreciate your participation today.
Chair Belcher, could I ask you
Thank
one
you.
quick question?
Just
I want to initiate you.
Okay.
I'm really trying to understand the numbers, and I think I do. On your Exhibit 00M-1, cumulative, for residential, cumulative under recovery, 13,926,000. And if I divide that by the number of counts, 662,770, I come up with about 8 million. But since it's capped at 1, I think the number would have been like $2.10, but it's capped at $1. Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct. That is kept based on the compliance with Act 236.
Okay. Good enough. Thank you very much, and welcome.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions? Mr. Nelson, any redirect?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No redirect. We would ask that Mr. Morgan be excused.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Appreciate your testimony today. You may stand down.
Thank you.
Mr. Nelson.
Madam Chair, I'm going to hand things off to Ms. Pittman at this point.
Okay, Ms. Pittman.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Jenny Pittman for ORS. At this time, I would like to call Brandon Bickley to the stand.
Mr. Bickley, when your picture and the court reporter's picture are on the screen, please raise your right hand to be sworn.
In the testimony you're about to give, do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Bickley, please state your full name and occupation for the commission.
My full name is Brandon Sinclair Bickley. I am a regulatory analyst for the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff.
Are you the same Brandon Bickley who pre-filed 6 pages of direct testimony in this docket on March 16th, 2021?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No, I do not.
If I asked you today the same questions as those posed in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Vice Chair, ORS asks that the pre-filed direct testimony of Brandon Bickley be read into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Bickley's pre-filed direct testimony will be read into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you. And Mr. Bickley, did you also file as an attachment to your direct testimony a series of exhibits marked BSB 1 through BSB 6?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to those exhibits?
No, I do not.
Madam Vice Chair, ORS asks that exhibits BSB 1 through BSB 6 be marked for identification and entered into the record as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Exhibits BSB 1 through BSB 6 will be marked as composite exhibit and identified as hearing exhibit 12, and hearing exhibit 12 will be admitted into evidence of this case. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bickley, did you prepare any surrebuttal testimony in this docket?
No, I did not.
Did you prepare a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Please present that to the commission.
Certainly. Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and members of the Commission. The purpose of my direct testimony is to set forth ORS's recommendations resulting from ORS's examination and review of Dominion Energy South Carolina's power plant operations used in the generation of electricity to meet the company's retail customer requirements during the review period. ORS examined various fuel and performance-related documents as part of our review. These documents address the company's electric generation and power plant outage and maintenance activities. In preparation for this proceeding, ORS analyzed the company's monthly fuel reports, including power plant performance data, unit outages, and generation statistics. ORS attended, via virtual participation, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's 2019 annual assessment meeting for the VC Summer Nuclear Station, which was held on April 2nd, 2020. ORS met virtually with company personnel from various departments to discuss and review the company's electric generation, power plant outages, and maintenance activities. In addition, ORS monitored electric generation statistics through industry and governmental publications. Based on ORS's review, the company made reasonable efforts to maximize unit availability and minimize fuel costs. The company's maintenance schedules and projected performance data for its power plants were found to be reasonable. ORS found the company's outages to be reasonable based on ORS's review of the outage data from the actual period, forecasted outage data from docket number 2020-2-E, historical outage data from previous annual fuel proceedings, and industry experience. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Bickley. Madam Vice Chair, Brandon Bickley is available for questions from the parties and the commission.
Thank you, Ms. Pittman. Any questions from South Carolina Energy Users Committee?
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Any questions from SACE CCL?
No questions. You, Vice Chair Belzer.
Dominion Energy?
Sorry, no questions.
Thank you. Commissioners? Any commissioner questions? Hearing none, Ms. Pittman, we're back to you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I'd ask that Mr. Bickley be excused.
Mr. Bickley, thank you for your testimony, your appearance today. And with that, you may stand down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Pittman.
At this time, Madam Vice Chair, ORS would like to call its final witness, Mr. Michael Seaman Wynn.
Mr. Seaman Wynn, when your picture and the court reporter's picture on the screen, would you raise your right hand to be sworn?
In the testimony you're about to give, do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Seaman Wynn, please state your full name and occupation for the commission.
My name is Michael Seaman Wynn. I am the Deputy Director of Energy Operations for the Office of Regulatory Staff.
Are you the same Michael Seaman Wynn who pre-filed 9 pages of direct testimony in this docket on March 16th, 2021?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No, I do not.
If I asked you today the same questions as those posed in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Thank you. Madam Vice Chair, ORS asks that the pre-filed direct testimony of Michael Seaman Wynn be read into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Seaman Wynn's direct pre-filed testimony will be read into the record as if given from the stand. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Seaman Wynn, did you also file as an attachment to your direct testimony exhibits marked as attachment MSH1 through MSH5?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to those exhibits?
No, I do not.
Madam Vice Chair, ORS asks that exhibits MSH1 through MSH5 be marked for identification and entered into the record as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Seaman Wynn's exhibits MSH1 through MSH5 will be marked as a composite hearing exhibit, will be identified as hearing exhibit 13, and entered into the record of this case. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Seaman Wynn, did you file rebuttal testimony in this docket?
No, I did not.
Mr. Seaman Wynn, did you prepare a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Please present that to the commission at this time.
I think I can still say good afternoon, Madam Chairman, Madam Vice Chairman, that is, and members of the commission. My testimony sets forth ORS's findings and recommendations resulting from our examination of Dominion Energy South Carolina's fuel expenses used in the generation of electricity to meet its South Carolina retail customer requirements. ORS examined various fuel-related documents as part of our review. These documents address the company's fuel, environmental, and purchase power expenses for the actual, estimated, and forecasted periods. In preparation for this proceeding, ORS analyzed the company's monthly fuel reports. ORS examined the company's contracts for nuclear fuel coal, natural gas, fuel oil, transportation, and environmental reagents. ORS also evaluated the company's policies and procedures for fuel procurement. ORS met with company personnel on multiple occasions representing a variety of areas of expertise to discuss and review the company's fossil and nuclear fuel procurement, fuel transportation, environmental costs and compliance procedures, forecasting, and general company policies and procedures regarding fuel procurement. ORS reviewed the company's projected sales and analyzed them with regards to the projections from its last fuel proceeding and actual sales from the actual period. ORS found the company's sale projections to be reasonable and in line with historical sales data. ORS reviewed the company's forecasted costs for nuclear fuel, coal, natural gas, fuel oil, transportation, and environmental reagents for the estimated and forecasted periods. ORS compared monthly projected costs to historical projections, actual data, and commodity prices from numerous industry publications. ORS found the company's forecasted costs to be reasonable. Subsequent to the filing of my direct testimony, a stipulation was entered into between the company, ORS, and the South Carolina Energy Users Committee in this proceeding. Should the Commission approve the rates as proposed by the stipulating parties, the average monthly bill for a residential customer on rate 8 using 1,000 kilowatt hours would increase from $122.31 to approximately $123.90, a net increase of $1.59. The stipulation is offered as a fair, reasonable, and full resolution of the signing parties' issues in this proceeding. Further, ORS believes the stipulation is in the public interest of South Carolina and respectfully requests that the Commission approve the stipulation as presented. This concludes my summary.
Thank you. Madam Vice Chair, Mr. Seaman Wynn is available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Pittman. South Carolina Energy Users Committee.
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
SACE and CCL.
No questions. Thank you.
Dominion Energy.
No questions.
Commissioners.
Madam Vice Chair, this is Commissioner Thomas.
Commissioner Thomas, please proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Stephen Wynn, I would like to say it's good to see you, but I can't see you. And but hopefully you can at least hear me, maybe see me.
I can see you and hear you, Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. Very good, very good. Well, I appreciate you taking my questions this afternoon. And really my questions are all kind of centered around the proposed change to the nuclear labor costs and the other costs associated with that transition, the same change, all with regards to that change. So why is now the time to make this change?
Well, Commissioner, let me talk a little bit about this. This is the first time that we have seen a Dominion suggest making some changes to include these type of labor costs regarding nuclear fuel procurement in a field docket. As such, we definitely took a lot of interest in the company's proposal. I personally met with the company virtually on a couple of different occasions. We have sent out discovery requests and gotten responses back on several questions that we had regarding the company's proposal. In addition, we held discussions with the Duke Energy's nuclear procurement and their accounting teams to discuss how Duke Energy has been accounting for nuclear fuel design labor costs. What we have concluded is that Dominion Energy's proposal is in line with what the Duke companies are doing. As Mr. Rooks said earlier, I would agree with him that the customers are being held harmless
in that there will be a reduction from the company's base rates for the nuclear fuel design labor costs that would then be recovered through the company's fuel rates. So in essence, yeah, the customers are being held harmless. Why is it being held? Why is the company suggesting to implement this change now? It's been a couple of years since Dominion Energy purchased the legacy SCANA company, SC DN specifically, and they are looking to integrate the South Carolina operating system under the operations umbrella of Dominion Energy as a whole. As such, they are taking best practices, whether they be from Dominion or from SC DN legacy, and are looking to take those best practices and use them throughout the larger company as a whole. They're also looking at having the same operating system, whether it be for nuclear fuel or other operational issues, as well as probably accounting and finance as well, under a uniform system throughout the entire Dominion company. So that would be my response to you, sir.
Okay, thank you for that. So if I understood you correctly, you believe that it's a kind of a wash for the customers. It's not like they're going to receive some benefit. You guys are supposed to be watching out for the customer interests, and it doesn't sound like you expect customers to receive some sort of a benefit from this change. Just not.
Commissioner, I'm sorry, I cut you off there, Commissioner. I would say that the customers would be receiving a benefit from Dominion having a uniform system for accounting for its design of nuclear fuel, as opposed to having one system for the plants in Virginia and another system for the plant in South Carolina, both of which are being addressed by the same people. They're being able to use a uniform system throughout, not having to incur expenses to use one system in one state and another system in another state. So I would expect there would be benefits to South Carolina ratepayers.
Okay. So along the same line of questioning there, the prior witness, I believe it was Mr. Brookmeyer, the company talked a little bit about the potential of a turnkey bundled approach. And can ORS be certain that this is at least as beneficial, if not more so, than the turnkey approach? Any way that ORS can address that?
Absolutely, Commissioner. This is actually something that we asked about in our discovery. The company responded that they haven't done an analysis as to a turnkey product compared to the purchasing the different commodities or the different stages in the nuclear fuel process independently. I believe Mr. Brookmeyer did speak to this. It is important to remember that should a turnkey product be delivered by a single entity for mining and milling all the way up through fuel fabrication or what have you, that would be by a party who would be looking to make a profit. So if there are ways for Dominion Energy to conduct those analyses, those research and analysis in-house, they would be able to probably do it at a less expensive option. Of course, ORS will be reviewing the company's nuclear fuel contracts on an annual basis as part of its annual fuel review. We will be conducting discussions with company. Should they be looking to make any changes to the processes that they are currently using, which is to purchase different aspects of the nuclear fuel cycle independently. If they look to go to a turnkey approach for a bundled product, we will of course have discussions and do research and analysis to understand why the company felt that that could be a benefit to the ratepayers of South Carolina. So that is always first and foremost in their minds is what are the companies doing that is in the best interest of South Carolina ratepayers.
Okay. So I guess another question I have is that switching accounting methods or accounting procedures can be problematic. Things can slip through the cracks or just go sideways in a number of different manner, I guess. So how will ORS be certain that nothing is double counted or slipped through the cracks?
You're breaking up a bit, Commissioner, but I think your question was how is ORS going to make sure that if the commission were to approve the company's request, that there would not be a double counting of the nuclear design labor expenses. Am I correct? That's your question? Yes,
that's it. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So ORS has a robust audit process. You spoke with Mr. Clickley earlier, who is one of our senior auditors and very good at his job. We have a professional audit team who very carefully reviews companies' expenses to make sure that that accounts aren't being recovered, expenses aren't being recovered through more than one avenue, and this would be one of those items. Should the commission approve the company's request as part of the stipulation and also addressed in my direct testimony and the testimony of company witness Rooks, the company would be looking to make an offsetting adjustment to its base rates in the same amounts to ensure that there is not a double counting of these labor expenses.
Okay. So that kind of brings me to my next question. Dominion, South Carolina is currently in a rate case, and I would assume then that these costs are currently in the test year numbers that form the basis for the current rate case. So how does what you just said relate to what's going on with the current rate case?
As a very interesting question, Commissioner. It's important to remember that these are two separate proceedings with two different sets of issues, and more importantly, Commissioner, under two different test years. The rate case, if I remember correctly, is under a 2019 test year with pro forma adjustments, and this fuel proceeding is under a 2020 test year. Of course, going forward, there would need to be some adjustments to the company's base rates, but that would be handled outside of the company's proceeding in the general rate case right now. The changes that the company has proposed in this field docket are not part of the company's proposal in that rate case, so they would be addressed separately from the rate case.
Okay, well, that's an important point for me. I appreciate that. So let me ask, okay, so I believe that, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can.
Sorry, I had some background noise there. So given that these costs are incurred in, I believe, 4 different states, how can ORS be certain that they are being appropriately allocated between the states and there's nothing that's just kind of flowing around out there and ends up hitting South Carolina by mistake or some other way? Just want to make sure that the allocations between the states are completely correct.
Yes, sir, definitely. One of the things that ORS is very accustomed to is having having utilities that operate in multiple jurisdictions. Let me take one of our biggest examples, that would be Duke Energy. Duke Energy has two operating states in the Carolinas, that's North and South Carolina. They have Duke Energy Florida. They also have 3 states in the Midwest where they have operations as well. Now, there are certain functions that are exclusive to South Carolina within Duke. There are certain functions that are exclusive to just the 2 Carolina companies, and there are functions that are company-wide. Some very high-level examples of those would be IT, HR, and when we are in a general rate proceeding for Duke, we are accustomed to making sure that appropriate costs are allocated properly to ensure that South Carolina ratepayers are only paying for their portion of those services. Excuse me. With Dominion, South Carolina now being part of a larger operating fleet, operating company that operates in multiple jurisdictions, we will apply the same procedures that we do for Duke, the same that we do for Piedmont Natural Gas that operates in 3 different jurisdictions, the same that we would for Blue Granite, which operates in multiple jurisdictions, to ensure that South Carolina ratepayers are only paying for the costs that should be allocated to them.
Okay. Thank you for that. So just one final question. If we were to decide to stick with the current procedures, would that create a serious problem for ORS if we were just to say we would like to keep doing it the same way we have been?
I'm sorry, you're breaking up a little bit again, Commissioner. I understood that if the commission were to not agree with the company's proposal and keep the status quo, would that be a problem for ORS?
Yes, that's a good summary of my question. Yes.
No, Commissioner, that would not be an issue for ORS. Whether the commission approve the company's request or not would not be an issue for ORS. Should the status quo remain in place, then ORS would use the same policies and procedures that it has in review of the company's expenses in the fuel case. Should the commission approve the company's request, then we would make appropriate changes to ensure, as we discussed earlier, that appropriate costs, appropriately allocated costs, would be paid for by South Carolina ratepayers, but no more than that. So either way, would not be an issue for ORS.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you answering my questions, and that's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioners, any other questions? Commissioner Caston.
Good afternoon, Mr. Seaman Wynn.
Afternoon, Commissioner.
Actually, Commissioner Thomas asked one of the questions I had, which was good, relative to shifting that proposed nuclear cost from the base rate case to a fuel case proceeding. You know, my question was going to be is that better for the customer or not? And if I understood you correctly, you said, well, actually 2 things. Customers are being held harmless, and it would be a benefit to the customer if Dominion, since they're a multi-state company, did it the same way. Is that correct?
Yes, Commissioner. It does sound like I said 2 different things there, but they're honestly the same thing. If you like, I could elaborate a little bit more.
I didn't say it was 2 different things. You just said those 2 things. And I think they're similar. But that said, if I'm understanding how it would work, say, and since this is my first fuel case, These are annual, and it's, if approved, pretty much a pass-through, correct?
Yes, Commissioner, and to be honest with you, all fuel is a pass-through.
And that's on an annual basis, so it's either going to be, positive or negative relative to that particular cost or a cost like that, correct?
Yes, Commissioner, they are reviewed annually. If there are any changes, then they would flow through in preceding fuel cases and would be reviewed on each and every year.
And if it continued as it was, it would just be in a regular rate case that came up whenever it came up.
Yes, Commissioner.
So, and this isn't a loaded question, but and I think Witness Brookmeyer said something similar, that it would be, to Dominion's advantage to, use a uniform process that they're using in other states company-wide, and I guess that would be better for them, more efficient, and I get it. That makes sense. Do you agree?
Yes, sir, I do.
So if it makes more sense for them and it's more efficient and useful for them, I would think it would save the customer some money some way to do it this way, would it not?
I believe that would be the case as well, Commissioner.
I didn't hear that discussion in all this process, so is there a way to quantify that?
Commissioner, I would have to defer to the company on that, but I would say I have seen mergers before. I've seen Duke and Synergy in the Midwest merger. I have seen Duke Carolinas and Duke and Progress merge. I've seen Duke and Piedmont merge. In each of those mergers that I've seen, there have been operational efficiencies that have benefited customers over years. Are they absolutely quantifiable? I suppose if you really wanted to get down into the weeds, it could potentially be done. Of course, as I said, started out, I would defer to the company on that, but I would expect there to be operational efficiencies, yes.
Well, and I'm all for those kind of things. I'm all for, trying to find a better way to do it, more efficient way to do it. And economies of scale makes sense to me. But I think we were talking about $1.59 a month per customer, correct?
That's the increase that's proposed in this case that we're, in this case, yes, sir.
And $1.59 is $1.59. If it was, whatever that efficiency was that helped that more, that'd be lovely too, I think. All that said is, I think it is great that the utility and everyone is thinking in terms of finding better ways to do things and more efficient ways to do things. It is my hope and expectation that those efficiencies and those things will benefit the customers. Not just rhetorically, but physically. That's what matters. So, that said, it'd be nice to find that quantifiable measure, I guess, but I'll leave that to you for right now. How's that?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
A couple other questions, if I may. Has ORS reviewed the meter and/or generator records to verify or determine when Dominion's demand peak occurred?
Commission, we look at the company's FERC Form 1 that is filed with the federal government, as mentioned by company witness Brooks. We verify that the information, that the company's information on its peak demand is the same or is tied to the information in that federally required report. And that, so yes, sir, we do verify. We don't go out and look at the actual individual meter reads for 700,000 customers, but we do track it through fully audited, federally required reports. If there are indications that something is different than the norm, then we hold discussions with the company to determine if there is a reason for what the reasons are for anything that differs from the norm. So those peak demands are analyzed and confirmed by ORS.
Okay, so ORS does review, I guess, the meter data. I mean, no, I'd probably be a little disappointed if you went out and looked at every single meter. But having that information, which is kind of the only way I know to do it, unless you just guess when the peak was. Now, I'm assuming with AMI, when that becomes fully operational, this should be a moot point from here on out, should it not?
Commissioner, peak demand has been required to be reported to the federal government for as long as I've been at ORS, and probably even longer than that. I think AMI will be able to enhance that some, but the information will always be available whether there's AMI or not.
I agree. So why is it relevant whether Dominion's peak occurs in the winter or summer?
Commissioner, I think that we have had some very robust discussions around peak, and I think it's important to understand that the differences in the different dockets that you are having to preside over with all of Act 62. In the case of the annual fuel reviews, which is what we are reviewing in this proceeding, peak demand is important because it allocates the company's environmental costs and its avoided capacity costs. Now, in context of this proceeding, if the peak demand were in the winter, then that would be the proper allocation. In this case, the company's peak has been in the summer, which is the proper allocation. Now, let me give you a little bit of my knowledge. When you're looking, and you probably heard some of this in the various IRP dockets and the 24 dockets that are open in various aspects associated with Act 62. Each class's contribution to peak demand differs at a summer peak than it does from a winter peak. Summer peaks are generally, as you've heard, in the afternoon hours, usually in the 2 to 6 p.m. time frame. Winter peaks occur in the early mornings of the winter months, so usually in the 6, 7 o'clock time frame. Now, if you think about this, during the summer hours, in the 4 to 6 p.m. time frame, you have commercial and industrial businesses that are still in their typical operating hours. You have people that are transitioning, well, working in those places, and then they transition back to their homes. So there is a different percentage of that each of those classes use. If you look at a winter peak at 6 a.m., 7 a.m., that's before most commercial and industrial operations have begun their business day. So most everyone is at home, getting up, turning on the heat, turning on the stove to cook breakfast, those types of things. So a winter peak has a higher allocation to the residential class than it does to the commercial and industrial classes. That's something that is very important to consider when you're looking at allocations, is how costs should be allocated to customers on an appropriate basis.
Very good. So you're saying that typically industry, commercial tend to be more uniform. So a separate rate class for that makes sense. And residential usage has a different peak. It's not necessarily uniform. It's low, jump up, down.
That's not really what I was trying to refer to, Commissioner. What I was trying to do was show you that the allocations using a summer peak are different than the allocations using a winter peak. For the context of this rate case, this fuel case, using that summer peak, which has been verified, again, using the company's FERC Form 1, those costs for environmental, those costs for avoided capacity are allocated using that summer peak. And a certain percentage, if you look at, if I would refer you to Mr. Rook's exhibit number, give me a moment to get to it, sir. Mr. Rook's exhibit number 3, attached to his direct testimony. This shows you the allocation that the company has used for the distribution of its environmental costs and avoided capacity, as well as distributed energy resource program costs. And looking at that exhibit, you can see that 49+% is going to the residential class, approximately 19% to the small general service class, 9% to medium general service, around 20% to large general service. Now that's using a summer peak. And using a winter peak, you would see that percentage for residential go up, and you would see the percentage for the small, medium, and large general service classes go down in an appropriate manner. So the point that I was trying to make, Commissioner, is that peak demand when it comes to the fuel cases is important because it shows, it allocates the costs appropriately. Whether it's a summer peak or whether it's a winter peak, the company uses its peak to allocate those costs.
Got it. That makes sense from an allocation point of view. I guess from not that you design electrical systems either, but from a purely functioning, say, design point of view as far as the system, sizing the system appropriately, whether it's winter peak doesn't matter. What matters is the allocation aspect of it, and the different usage patterns during the different seasons, in essence.
I agree.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to agree with the Commissioner. I think it's important to remember that this proceeding is not a planning proceeding. Those proceedings are the IRP proceedings that discussing whether it's appropriate to design the system on a summer peak or a winter peak is not one of the things that's under review in this proceeding.
Good enough. Thank you, Mr. Seaman Wynn. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Any other commissioners with questions for the witness? Ms. Pittman, any redirect?
No redirect. I'd ask that this witness be excused, and that concludes ORS's presentation.
Mr. Seaman Wynn, thank you for your testimony and your appearance today. You may stand down.
Thank you, ma'am.
Is there anything else from the parties this afternoon? Dominion?
Madam Chair, Dominion Energy doesn't have anything else. I was just, maybe you were gonna do this. I was gonna ask about proposed orders.
Yeah, we'll get that in a second. Energy
Okay.
Users Committee, anything else?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
Say CCL? Anything?
Nothing else from us.
ORS, anything else?
Nothing else from ORS. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Gisendana brought up proposed orders. We're on a quick turnaround. What are y'all thinking about? Mr. Gisendana, do you have a proposal?
I was gonna propose, and I recognize that you're on a quick turnaround, given that our, these fuel rates, the DSM and the pension rider are all requested to go in effect, the first billing cycle of May. I was going to suggest next Friday, the 16th.
That is exactly what I would suggest. I was going to say next Friday, the 16th, by what? Noon, 2 o'clock? What can we say?
2 o'clock would be, that should work for us.
Energy users, can you meet that?
Yes, ma'am.
Say CCL. Any objection to that?
No objection, thank you.
ORS?
No objection. That works for us.
Thank you. So we'll say proposed orders on Friday, April 16th, no later than 2 p.m. Give me something to read over the weekend. Thank y'all for that. I'd like to thank the parties, the witnesses, and the attorneys. As always, y'all have been most professional, and we greatly appreciate that. And if there's nothing further, this is last chance, parties. If there's nothing further, we will adjourn this hearing, and you'll hear from us at an upcoming business meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.